there's a battle going on right now for your soul, right? This is not only a physical battle, this is a spiritual battle. And whether you believe in religion or not, at least when I can talk about the gateway stuff is real. We're more than just, like what Robert Monroe says in the very first phrase, you are more than just physical matter. You're on the verge of discovering who and what you truly are.
This is the first step along your path to a gateway beyond which is discovery, your own discovery of reality, of truth, of who and what you are. Now a simple preparation. Because of the special audio techniques used, it's important that certain sounds reach your right ear and others your left ear. To be sure of this, you should be hearing my voice in your right ear at this moment. If you are not hearing my voice in your right ear, turn your headphones around now so that you are hearing my voice in your right ear. Now, as you listen to the sound of ocean surf, move your body into a more relaxed position. Release any tensions or strain points. Move into whatever position is best for you. The sound of ocean surf, of waves, a natural sound most people find pleasing and relaxing. It is a sound of natural energy, the sound of waves of energy in action. You are going to learn to use waves of your own natural energy. You will learn to focus these and direct these energy waves that even now are a natural part of you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back for another episode. We have another returning favorite here today, all the way back from episode 1. We are almost to 100 now, so it's cool to be bringing the homies back on to talk about some cool stuff. And it's been a while since I listened to that first episode, but I remember we were alluding to it there that it was August 2023, and we were just about to go to Colombia, like the next couple of weeks later after that. And so to fill the listeners in, we spent, what was like 6 months total out of the last year and a half in Colombia.
Yeah.
Like 2 different 3-month stints, had tons of fun, like just constant cool conversations with you, dude, that I wish that we always had recording. like every day was just like hours and hours of just going through rabbit holes, because we're both going through some similar rabbit holes, some different ones, and it was just tons of fun. But this summer we both split up again, and it was like 5 months, and we like didn't talk at all because we were just so busy. We were both just grinding, and it's that sort of friendship where it's like, yeah, we're just off doing our own thing. And so yesterday we finally got to hang out again here in our Northwest home. And I remember coming into this thinking like, oh man, I've been cooking on some geoengineering research. This is my rabbit hole I'm going to bring to the table. This is going to be amazing. And so as we get in the car to drive out for this hike, I basically talk about this, how, the geoengineering is going on, like all the weather is fake. They're spraying metal in the sky. And you're basically like, oh yeah, of course they're spraying metal in the sky, because if they didn't, the mass awakening would continue and people would figure out that all humans have innate psychic abilities. And from there, I'm like, what? And you just took me into all sorts of crazy directions after that. So we thought that it would be a fun time to just jump on here, record. This is so different than anything we've ever talked about before. But that's sort of the nature of this beast of diving into all these rabbit holes, is they just take you in these unsuspected places. And I thought it'd be tons of fun to just rant about it. So without further ado, Mr. Peruvian Bull, thank you for coming back. How you doing, man?
Good, dude. I'm doing well, man. It's been, too long. I'm glad we were able to catch up the other day. But yeah, no, we had a hiatus there for a while. I was filming podcasts and documentaries and traveling, and you were traveling as well, all through Mexico. I know you told me about all your adventures down there. Sounds like it was a blast. But yeah, I'm glad to be back in the Pacific Northwest, as I'm sure as you are as well, because like there's nothing like the Pacific Northwest. Like, it's just magical here.
And we were just talking about this too, how, the more traveling that I do, for sure, the more I realize that the Northwest is something special. It's beautiful here. I will always call it home. I think it's just always going to be that place that I am the most rooted in. But it also gets the get the brain juices flowing, man. Just like walking around in the forest and in the mountains and by the rivers, it really gets me motivated to reconnect with nature. And in doing that, it really expands your brain and your consciousness to think about these bigger things. It really goes in line with what we're
Hmm.
already doing, you know?
Hmm.
So yeah, man, I mean, we could pretty much start this Stargate gateway rabbit hole wherever you think it should go, because this is what you've been looking into. Like I've
Yeah.
been sprinkling the geoengineering stuff in the podcast, kind of giving people the intro to that. I did an episode with Matt Landman, the creator of the Frankenskies movie. I just did one with Daniel Prince recently, and we're going to go on another abrupt different direction here because
Yeah.
I just think that you can't have too many of these, you know. So this is the time, like I said, everyone's awakening right now, everyone's questioning everything, so why not just throw some crazy stuff out there that, or sounds crazy at least, but maybe it's not so crazy. That's what we'll learn today.
Yeah, no, this is, and I'll say this too, right? Like for other people who know and listen to my stuff, like I mostly talk about macro, Bitcoin investing. I research all that stuff all day. And I've still been researching that stuff and publishing research on it, but this has been the rabbit hole I've been diving down to like the last 6 months or so. And it's been a really crazy rabbit hole. And I honestly thought it was like hocus pocus until, June, July of this year. And I'll give a little background. So I've already told you, Ben, this story, but in college, when I was starting my second semester freshman year, I started to get these recurring dreams that were incredibly intense. So in my dream, I was standing alone in a field with all these green rolling hills, and there's a man in a black hearse driving away from me, and he has gray hair. And I know, for some reason, I know it's someone in my family, and it feels like they're going to die. And I had, when you have a dream like that one time, you're like, okay, this is just it's like random. It's like, this is a spoof, like whatever. But then it happens again and it happens again. And I had the same recurring dream for 30 nights in a row. And it got so bad where I called my family and I was texting them and I was like, look, I'm sensing that something bad's going to happen to someone in my family. My parents are both older. My parents are both in their 60s and 70s. And so they both have gray hair. And so I was worried that one of them was going to die. And then the day before spring break starts in March of freshman year, the dreams stop completely, just black radio silence. And I actually was really weird, is I had a very vivid dream of me sitting there and I was staring at a screen and it was like static. So my dream, instead of having actual like images, was just me staring at a static, TV. And then the next day my grandpa dies. And no one in the family knew he was ill. He had checked himself into a clinic by himself because he didn't want to burden the family. And he lives in Utah, so he lives a couple states over from me. He hadn't told anybody, and that entire month he was slowly deteriorating, and only his like caretaker knew. And then he passed away, and then everyone got the news like the next morning from the clinic that my grandfather had passed away. And so that was like a really weird event, right? And I was like, that's kind of insane. Like, how was I able to sense that? Like, why did I have this intuition that someone in my family was going to die? And when literally no one in my family knew, and I certainly didn't know. And so that's always like been in the back of my mind, but I don't really have a rational explanation for that. And I have a couple of friends that have similar stories where, they sense like someone in their family is going to get injured before it happens, or they, they can almost like see something before it, see something and predict it happening, and then it actually comes to pass, like things like that. But in June, I think you and I both met this guy Dan in Medellin, and Dan is an engineer. He's a mining engineer, and Dan was starting to study what he called the gateway process, and he wanted to like bring me in on his basically like rabbit hole dive down this hole. And
I remember when we were all like whitewater rafting together, he was kind of like throwing this at you, and I could tell like you're really absorbing it, because I knew your story that you'd had these weird things happen in your past. So this was like a big puzzle piece for you, So I was like, oh man, he's gonna take this and run with it. I know it.
Yeah, and to be fair, so okay, what was so weird is that in the same time he's telling me about this thing called the gateway process, and all these secrets about like, the basic like intuition and how, the spiritual world works. My brother, who's a property manager, and this is another crazy story. He's an atheist, complete like, agnostic. He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't believe in any. He was a complete materialist. What's called the materialist sciences, and he started having really, really vivid dreams, premonitions of the future, and this was all coincident with a house that he had that was reportedly haunted. He had like 4 different tenants who lived in this house who said that this house was haunted. They kept seeing ghosts, like outlines of people. Stuff kept getting moved. Doors and windows would open and shut loudly in the middle of the night. Food in the fridge would be removed and pulled and onto the counter. Like they would come out in the morning and all the food from the fridge was taken out and put out on the counters. And it's like stuff like that. And so he was kind of having his own awakening. He was starting to question his own beliefs and, is the spiritual world real? And all of this really came to a head when I started talking to one of my other Twitter mutuals named Stormy, and Stormy sent me the Gateway doc, and he said, you need to read this. And so, again, I had all this in the back of my mind, and I get on the plane back from Seattle, or from Medellin to Seattle, and I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just read? Like, he sent me this whole document, and I have it downloaded on my computer. Like when I'm on the plane, like I'll just read this thing for fun. And so I start reading it, and I'm just like raptured. I'm like reading each page, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, this is insane what I'm reading. I read the whole thing, and then I read it again, and then I read it again. And I land in Miami, and then on the connecting flight, I download some more files and download a bunch of podcasts and listen to more and more stuff. And then by the end of this, 12-hour trek from Medellin back to Seattle in the plane, I'm like, my entire reality is shattered. I'm like, what is going on? This is insane. Because the claims made in the Gateway document, which is basically a report by a commanding officer to a general, that was released it was created in 1983. It's released in 2003, but he basically outlines like his research on Project Stargate and his analysis of what is called the Gateway process. And the Gateway process is essentially this way to access your inherent psychic abilities. And what he claims is that all people have psychic abilities, and those abilities are like latent in most people, and some people have very, very high potential. Most people never access it, but the people who do have very high potential, if they're able to practice and work within the Gateway process, they can accelerate their like ability curve, and it basically blew everything I thought about, mysticism, spirituality, psychic abilities out of the water. It also created like a framework for me to think about spiritualism and how the universe works, and the existence of a soul, or the existence of, the divine that kind of flows through all things. And it tied together so many things I've learned about different religions. And so, yeah, once I read that document, that was game over for me. I just was fully committed to learning more, and I dove headfirst into the rabbit hole.
Awesome. And I would love to at some point talk about your experience with that, but you mentioned in their Project Stargate, and as I've spent the last 24 hours just gobbling up all these podcasts you gave me yesterday, I've learned a little bit about the basics of that. Essentially, this CIA operation where they are taking in all these people who believe they have psychic abilities, or they screen for people who have psychic abilities, and essentially, like everyone else, they thought like there's no way this is actually going to work, but we have unlimited money, so let's try it. And they ended up finding things that were unexpected. Is that basically how you would frame that? And could you maybe give us just an overview of what Project Stargate was?
Sure. So, and like we can go back to the beginning, right? Because this starts even earlier. So in the early 1970s, there was an Israeli magician by the name of Ori, and Ori was able to do things like read people's minds, like divine people's intentions, like names of their partners, favorite color, things like that. He was able to bend spoons. He was able to do card tricks and tell you what kind of card was in the deck. All sorts of, kind of like parlor tricks. But the thing is, he was one of the best in the world. And one day when he was giving one of his magic shows, he gets hit with a very intense feeling of a heart attack, and he basically gets prostrate on the stage. And people are like, what's going on? Is he acting? Is this part of this performance? And he gets up and he says, I just had basically a vision that the president of Egypt is going to die by a heart attack. And there's actually a journalist, and I know you've listened to this podcast, but there's a journalist in the audience who runs out, gets on the news wire, calls the news office, and nope, nothing's happened. And so they come back in, and people are basically disappointed, and they think that Ori just, scammed everybody. And then once the show ends, the evening starts to roll on, and a couple hours later, the president of Egypt is announced dead by a heart attack. And it had happened earlier that evening, so around the time that Ori had felt, had this sensation in his chest and had this intuition. And so nobody understood why that was. And a couple weeks later, a man dressed in black who worked for the CIA comes and approaches Ori and says, we want to basically research what this ability is. If this is real, if you're actually able to predict the future, and if you can sense things across time and space, we need to know how this actually functions. So they bring Ori over to the Stanford Research Institute, and they begin basically what becomes like a decade-long or so, or 8-year-long process of experimentation. And it's not only Ori. There's another famous psychic named Ingo Swann. There's also a couple others like Pat Price, Joe McGonigal. There's a bunch of unnamed psychics that they can't they redact their names, or they eliminate their last name. But they start doing experiments.
And Ori's last name was Geller, for anyone wondering. Ori Geller.
Yeah. And so they start doing these experiments. And so, they will, draw, they'll have a dictionary, and they'll pick a word from the dictionary, and then a man in one room that's soundproofed and has an electric Faraday cage around it will draw what he read. And then Ori's in another room 50 feet away, and they tell him, okay, he just drew the first thing. What did he draw? And on the first attempt, he got all 8 correct. They did 8 cards. He got all of them correct. And then the next time he did it again, it was 9. He got 7 out of the 9 correct, and 2 which he refused to answer, which he couldn't see for some reason. And so people were like, everyone at Stanford Research Institute was like, what the, this is crazy. But he's also a magician. So it's like, is he actually, is he just tricking us? This is insane. How is he able to read what's on the other, what's on another card? And so later on, they actually bring in another guy named Ingo Swann. And Ingo was a very eccentric character. He's a artist, he's a painter. He was frizzy hair, crazy guy. And he had for a long time lived in the Bay Area, and claimed that he had this ability of psychic, the psychic gift to see through time, read people's minds, understand how things worked. And they bring him in, and they start doing experiments on him. And, they do experiments they will write a 5-digit pin, and they put it on top of a filing cabinet in the same room, but it's he can't see it. There's no mirrors on the ceiling, nothing crazy like that. They say, tell us what it is. And he sits there and he tells them the number exactly, and he gets it right. He has an 80 to 90% correct hit rate. And they do double blind studies. They do placebo studies. They try, messing him up with a Faraday cage. They try, all sorts of things to see what affects it. And it seems like he's basically able to do it in almost any situation, as long as he's able to meditate and concentrate on his, on his ability. And so what happens is later on in as the 1970s roll on, the CIA, it's the Defense Intelligence Agency, comes out and says, we want to weaponize this. We want to figure out how we can use this for military applications.
I'm shocked they would ever weaponize something.
Isn't that surprising? I would have never guessed they would do that. So and I think it's 75, they start the very first projects. And the first projects go through several different names. There's Grill Flame, there's Sunfire, and it eventually evolves into Project Stargate by the late 80s. But they essentially get these men together, and there's a couple of women too, and they have them do experiments where they will have them, for example, they'll have two agents go out to a location. Then they tell us exactly what's at this location, and the person will be able to draw it from, basically from their remote viewing ability. They close their eyes, they meditate intently, they get their consciousness and their brainwaves to vibrate at a certain frequency, and that allows them to project their consciousness to another location and see what's actually there. And again, they try this, they keep thinking, right, like, man, this is no way this is real. So they say, well, maybe the agent is, working with them. So they start switching out different CIA agents and say, let's make sure that the agent isn't friends with them and just like somehow relaying the information with a secret device. No, it's not that. Okay, so maybe they're subtly using mentalism tricks to influence the mind of the person asking the question, or putting the coordinates down, or telling people where to go. And maybe that's directing them to, like, if you can tell the CIA analyst to, like, subconsciously, or if you can trick them into writing down the Golden Gate Bridge, and even though you don't see what they write down, then then their other agent goes up to the Golden Gate Bridge, and you, quote unquote, project your consciousness out and you see the Golden Gate Bridge. You've just tricked everybody, right? So they do all these experiments where they take out all the factors that could normally explain this kind of thing, and every single time it still works. Like, no matter what they do, it still works. And they're like shocked, right? Because this is essentially saying that some people basically have superpowers. Like, some people are able to see through time and space. And what they decide is, like, well, why is this possible? For one, they want to research that. But for two, how can we weaponize this ability? How can we use it? And so what they started, after about a year or two of looking at locations around the US, which also included, by the way, one where they mistakenly actually found another black box secret CIA operation called Sugar Grove. They had Pat Price, who was he's a former police chief, who had used his quote unquote psychic abilities to solve crimes. And he was one of the most gifted psychics they had. And they asked him to do a psychic reading, and they gave him one of the analysts gave him the coordinates of his cabin. And Pat Price described a flagpole, like an old military base, an underground bunker, and all these files in complete detail, like as if he was there, like the color of the filing cabinet, a layout of this underground base. He said there's analysts working on computers, listening to radio stations, and there's these files on the wall that say 8-ball, cue ball, pool, and like, all these like kind of pool related or billiards related like names. And they think this is weird, and they have another psychic do the same thing. The psychic finds something similar, and they, the head analyst writes up this report and sends it to the Pentagon. And when the Pentagon sees this, they immediately send a surveillance team to come and basically investigate everyone, because they're like, not only does all of this exist, but it's all extremely classified, and none of you should know about this. And so they swept everyone for bugs. They checked everyone for, spy espionage. And basically they found out that the facility they found, so the analyst who had given them the coordinates of his cabin, he didn't know that just about like 500 meters away was an underground CIA bunker. And so all the psychics who had been told to go to that location kind of rerouted to the bunker because it was much more interesting. And that bunker was actually monitoring U.S. domestic and international radio traffic. And they were cataloging and recording what everyone was saying on the radio. And this was, happening in the mid 70s. And this was a top secret operation, right? This is kind of like a precursor to Solar Winds from Edward Snowden, for all the big data collection programs. And so, like, again, this was not supposed to be happening. They're not supposed to be spying on Americans. How do you know about this? And they just had, our psychics told us. And the generals are kind of like scoffing at it, but they're amazed. They're like, there's no way this is possible. But if it works, it works. And so they start using them. They start weaponizing this for espionage. And so, there's many examples, but they have, Joe McGonigal, who becomes Stargate Subject 001 in the early 80s. They have him spy on. There was a Russian submarine base, and he basically the interesting thing about this base is that it was about a mile from the ocean in in Siberia, and Joe goes inside the complex, and he basically he describes a submarine, and he says this submarine is about 2 to 3 times bigger than any submarine that has ever been commercially produced that I've seen. And Joe was an Army intelligence officer. He served in Vietnam. He's seen submarines before. And so he's like, they're building like a mega submarine, and they're probably, going to put nukes on it as well. And the CIA said, no, there's no way that's happening. Our satellite photos show that this thing is a mile away from the water. Like, this isn't a submarine base. They're building, they're building something else. You're lying. And he's like, no. He's like, inside this giant warehouse, they're building a submarine. Trust me. And he stuck with his guns. They wrote it off as a miss on the report, like saying he was incorrect. A year later, the satellite photos show that they start digging a canal from the warehouse all the way to the water. And then a couple months later, they show the submarine being floated on water all the way through the canal, a mile out to the ocean, and then slipping into the water. And it was, again, the satellite photos show the biggest submarine that had ever been built. And it basically exonerated him again. And so they were like, what is going on? How's this working? And so that's when they started really researching gateway process, like consciousness, what is consciousness? How does it work? How can we affect the physical world? And that's where I think the rabbit hole like truly begins.
Yeah. And I mean, I really think that this sort of what really sounds out there as these like mental capabilities people are having, this is going to blow open this next year or two, because there's so many anecdotes of this coming out, and it's becoming a popular topic people are very curious about, because it's just, that's the nature of viral content on the internet. And just like a week ago, I heard about the telepathy tapes, which is this other podcast that just came out fairly recently, I think. But it became like I think it was in the top 3 podcasts in the world for some period on the charts. And then Joe Rogan was talking about it on his episode with Duncan Trussell on Christmas. And so like a bunch of people are looking at this, and they're clearly interested in this. And for people that haven't heard that, I recommend it. I'll put a link in the show notes. But the telepathy tapes is basically, and I should say, I've only listened to the first 2 episodes. I'm just starting it, but it's pretty much following this story where a documentarian gets in touch with this very credentialed doctor who has been really obsessed with this idea of these nonverbal autistic children who just have this crazy connection with usually one of their parents or someone in their family, where they can read their mind. They know everything they do. They can tell like where they go when they are going about their day. If they're thinking about a number, they can guess it, and that sort of thing. And this is pretty much in the same realm of this, psychic abilities that people, by traditional science, we think that there's no way that this could work. But it's starting to pop out more often. And even with your own personal experience of those visions you've had earlier in your life, I've never had anything like that. But I mean, I can only imagine, like, when there are a lot of people out there, probably some listening, who either themselves or know someone who insists they've had some experience like this. And it just opens the door to thinking, this is at least worth exploring. I know that to most people out there who have never thought about this stuff before, it sounds crazy, but a lot of stuff sounds crazy until you realize it's true. And we all know that conspiracy theory is code for spoiler alert. So we're going along with that pretty much every time.
Every
it's called pseudoscience or anything, any of those like terms that gets thrown out. More often than not, it leads to the truth.
Yeah. Every conspiracy theory is just 6 months away from being proven true, right? So that's what COVID's taught us, basically.
Exactly.
Everyone. And here's what I'll say too, right? I was raised with a completely materialist science worldview. I actually went to college to study biology initially. My dad's an atmospheric scientist. My dad used to be an ardent atheist. Now he's Christian, but he used to be an ardent atheist. And I was raised to believe, like, you are a clump of cells. You're a very advanced clump of cells. Your consciousness is an emergent property of your brain matter. and your consciousness is isolated just to you, right? The world you see is based on, and your perception, your consciousness is just based on, your own brain. And if you destroy your brain, if you get shot in the head, your consciousness ends. It's over. It's done with. There's no spiritual mumbo jumbo with your consciousness. It's just over, because all it is just like a complex, almost like video game program that you use to parse and filter the sensory data that you're getting in from the world, right? You can process, hundreds of thousands of bits per second consciously, and many more than that, millions of bits per second subconsciously. And so your consciousness that you see and feel every day, your ability to feel pain, love, hate, fear, all that is just, it's just like your brain's way of processing the world around you and thinking about things. And I believed that for a long time until I started to research, Gateway. And I'd say I was religious somewhat, but I always had doubts. But with Gateway, it seems like it explains so much of the world around us, right? It explains so much of the spiritualism and the mysticism, especially that ancient religions had, that modern religions just can't account for. And like, if you think about it like this, right? The modern human being is incredibly limited in that if you just take the electromagnetic spectrum, the human eye can only see a fraction of all available light, right? So if you remember going through middle school physics class or even high school physics class, you remember learning that, light, it's both a, particle and a waveform, right? And if you change the frequency of the light particle, it changes the color. And it also eventually changes into, gamma ray, X-ray. And then if you go lower, it changes to radio waves, right? And so between, on the spectrum, you go all the way in the low end for radio waves, and then you move up and you get to, infrared, then you get to normal light, then you get to microwave, and then you get up, over into X-ray, gamma ray, stuff that would actually be damaging to your body. But because the frequency increases and the energy of the particle generally increases, but the human brain and the human eye is only able to see, less than 1% or so of the total spectrum of light. Like when you walk around and look outside, if you had eyes that could see infrared, you would see a completely different world. If you had eyes that saw gamma radiation, you would see a completely different world. That's why, the night vision goggles are so amazing, because what they're doing is they're taking a new, they're taking a new wavelength of light that you can't see with your naked eye, and they're translating it into a wavelength that you can see. So they basically, that's a way to allow humans to see things that they normally can't. And that's pretty incredible. And that makes you think, like, how much of the world, how much of what's happening in real life are we actually missing because we can't physically see it? And what Gateway purports to do is, allow you to basically increase your sensory abilities, and not physically. So like, not necessarily all the time that you can actually see more wavelengths of light, right? But it just means that there's more to the world than you're being led to believe. And even that your own senses tell you there's much more. And so that's hiding behind all of this. And if we get further, so this is the interesting part about the Gateway documents, right? This is where they butt up against material science. For a long time, there's been a quandrum in quantum physics where if they do, they'll do the double slit experiment where they have a piece of metal, they have two slits cut through the metal, and they shoot photons through. And when they shoot photons through, the photons will form interference patterns on the other side of the plate, on the receiving plate. And those interference patterns tell us that the photons are acting as a waveform, right? Not as particles. But it's strange because, they should be theoretically particles, but somehow they're acting like waveforms. And when you, change the frequency and you change the rate of firing of the photons, the pattern changes and the interference pattern in between them changes. Now, what they found that was really weird is whenever they observed and they tried to have a device to directly observe the photon, this is what's called And again, I'm not like amazing with quantum physics, but this is kind of like the Schrodinger's cat paradox, right? Like you don't know what the superposition is until you look at it. When you observe a quantum, when you observe a particle on like the quantum level, it should be in what's called a superposition, which means it's like, think of 0 and 1 binary. It should be flipping between 0 and 1 infinitely fast, and basically be in a state of possibility and not be dialed into 1. But the minute you look at it, they collapses the quantum wave function, and the particle, the quark either becomes up or down. So it flips into either 0 or 1 the minute you look at it. So your own consciousness has affected this. And physicists thought, they said, okay, well, maybe the device we're using to look at it is changing the result. So they changed the device. Still the same thing. Maybe it's because we're scanning the particle before it goes to the double slit and not after. So they move it to after. Still it happens. And they found that the determining factor is not the actual the device that looks at it, or even the particle, or even how many particles go through the double slit experiment. It's the consciousness of the human being looking at it. So the fact that a human being is sitting there and staring at the results, it changes the results, just their consciousness. And that's when I started to be like, what is going on? When I found out about these quantum experiments. And, there's many, many examples. So I'll give you some more. They had another study, and if you want, I can send you all these studies. And a lot of them are...
I'll throw them all in the show notes for people to look themselves too.
Yeah, sure. A lot of them are like, they like stun the physicists, because the physicists have no explanation for why this happens. But there's one they did in Japan where Japanese scientists got people together. They got them in a room, and they had a quantum random number generator. And so this thing, basically a quantum computer, obviously can do trillions of operations a second. And so it could flip between 0 and it would flip 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, almost like an imaginary coin toss, a trillion times a second. So if you want anything that's like a perfect bell curve distribution, right, of 50-50, this computer is your best bet, because it will switch between 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, and it'll be basically perfectly out to 13 decimal places, 50-50. Like it'll be 49.9999999 out to 13 decimal places. And 13 decimal places, for people who don't know, is extremely accurate in science. Like there's nothing that in the physical world, in biology, that you can measure that would get out to 13 decimal places, with the exception of like extremely, extremely advanced technology that can, look at the size of a DNA strand or something like that. Like we don't have most things. There's a margin of error that overshadows like the accuracy of it. So you have to adjust up and down by, maybe a couple hundredths of a percent, or even thousandths of a percent is extremely accurate. But something that goes out to 13 decimal places is like the most accurate thing ever. And so they have this quantum computer, and they have these test subjects go in, and they don't tell them that the quantum computer is there. It's beneath a sheet. And it just seems like an empty white room with white walls. And they just say, okay, we want you to sit on the floor and think of either the number 0 or 1. And we want you to write down on a piece of paper which number you thought of. And so then they have them sit there, and then the person meditates 1, 1, 1, 1. And they meditate on it for a minute. And then they say, okay, rest, stop. Don't think about it. Just think about anything else. Okay. Then they have them go back. Okay, choose, sit, do that same number. Go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And the scientists who are watching this just can't believe what they're seeing. They see the probability shift. So the Pareto distribution, or not Pareto, the normal distribution shift from 50-50 to 52-48 or to 53-47. And they're like, again, shocked, because how is it that someone's thoughts are changing the results of a quantum random number generator that's in the same room? Like, how is that possible? They don't even know it's there, but their thoughts are changing it. So they start.
And didn't they find that certain people could consistently push that number even higher, like repeatably?
Experienced meditators, yeah. So they continued these studies. They did experienced meditators. Experienced meditators have a stronger effect. Then they tried groups of people. So they had, like 7 people go in the room and all think of the number 1. And it was able to move from, instead of 52-48 to 55-45. So a stronger effect the more people you have on it. And then they tried distance. So they said, look, let's, some of our test subjects flew back to the US. Let's call them up and set up another experiment. We'll have a scientist go out with them. And at like exactly 6 p.m. Tokyo time, which is, 9 a.m. New York or whatever, we want you to meditate on this room and think of the number 1. And even over distance, they found distance had 0 effect on the results of the experiment. And so the person was still able, with just their mind, able to change the probability of a quantum random number generator, significantly. And we're talking something that's like an 8 or 9 standard deviation move, which, for those who don't know, that in statistics, that's like an insane problem. I mean, that's, 1 in 150, 180 million chance for it to happen one time. And you're able to do it, repeat this experiment consistently, like dozens of times, right? And so for this data set. And so that told them that there's something going on here, right? And like, what the fuck? How are these people able to do this? What is going on? And essentially what some of these scientists like Dean Radin or Michael Persinger found out is basically that, consciousness exists on the quantum level, and your own consciousness affects other consciousness in the universe, even at the quantum level. So you can affect, right? You can affect other people. You can affect, or you can sense or change or be changed by other consciousnesses elsewhere in the universe. And so because it's all connected, and because, at the quantum level with quantum entanglement, it happens outside of time and space. 2 particles on different sides of the universe can, if they're quantum entangled, if one flips from up to down, the other one will flip down instantly, faster than the speed of light. So they somehow are able to communicate faster than the speed of light. And that's what this showed, right? Because if you think about it, going back to Newtonian physics, or even like Einsteinian, special relativity and general relativity, time and space are generally fixed. Time is linear and space is fixed. You can't move, only gravity and supermassive objects can really bend space and therefore start to bend time. Something that is as simple as a human being should not be able to bend time. And what these experiments or bend space, and what these experiments have shown is that consciousness can exist outside of time and space. And that's shocked them, because again, what they did with Project Stargate is, they started going as deep as they can into figuring out and trying to learn about all the different things that they could learn about, right? So Ed Dames, the guy who ran it, and he actually did a podcast, a really good one with Sean Ryan. He's a former nuclear physicist, very bright guy. And, he was curious about some of the questions of the universe. So he had one of his subjects basically astral project / remote view Mars at 1 million BC. And that guy described, obelisks and pyramids and an alien race living on Mars that was dying and that was trying to escape Mars. That's, again, we'd have no way of confirming how true this is. It was just one psychic who said it in the 1980s, from a CIA report, but it's interesting. There's other ones they've done where, there was one which was really crazy, where Pat Price was trying to remote view a secret Soviet base in the Arctic, and he accidentally wound up in Alaska. And he says that he found he was drawn to this site for some reason as he was remote, projecting his consciousness, astral projecting his consciousness. As he was doing it, he was like, trying to fly over the North Pole, and then he was just like, stop. He's like, there's something in Alaska, and he goes to, this mountain in Alaska. I think it's McKinley. And he's on the ground, and he's like walking around, and he notices there's like an entrance to a base, and he goes back later and does another astral projection, and he goes down into the base, and there's an entire secret base military operation, in Alaska underneath a mountain. And he said it looks like NORAD. There's all these people working on all these computers, all these screens. And again, he tells his handler, the guy writes it up in a report, sends it to Pentagon, and Pentagon immediately is pissed. They're like, how the fuck do you know about this? Like, this is top secret. Like, nobody should know. And sadly, a couple months later, Pat Price ends up dead in Las Vegas, and people don't know exactly what happened, but there was a KGB agent with blonde hair in the same area at the same time, and she was talking to him at one of the tables, and the thought is that she slipped something into one of his drinks and basically poisoned him and killed him. But the CIA ordered that no autopsy be done. They had agents go to the hospital after he died. After he did have a heart attack and die, they required no autopsy. They said, cause of death is heart attack, no other contributing factors, and they cremated his body and destroyed any other evidence. And then after that, they were much more careful with letting their remote viewers basically travel unguarded. They basically kept them all at these different compounds in Maryland and Virginia, and had them stay under lock and key and say, you can't, you're going to stay in these rooms and work for us in this little black box, because we can't risk losing you guys, having you guys be compromised or be killed. So, yeah.
Crazy stuff, dude. Basically, Stranger Things is a documentary. A lot of these things are really happening. They were based on stuff. And wasn't that show actually very strongly based on the Montauk Project?
Montauk,
what was that?
yeah.
Where does that come into this?
So the Montauk Project, that one is, the problem with Montauk, I think, is it has much less documentation around it than Stargate. Like, if you go online and you look up Project Stargate, you'll find dozens of videos. You'll find there's the publicly released CIA gateway process document, which is related to Project Stargate. There's all these documents that have been released, and some of them are redacted, some of them have pages missing, but most of them are like publicly viewable, and you can see that the CIA officially confirms, yes, this was a real project. Yes, we actually did this. Here's the documentation. Here's how you can think about this. But the Montauk Project, there's only like a few anecdotal documents, but it was essentially a program in an Air Force base in New Jersey, I believe, an abandoned Air Force base, where they were essentially trying to use, Stargate assets, psychics, and they were trying to like divinate the future. And it was reportedly shut down because, somehow they opened this portal and this like monster came through and started killing people on the base. And then they immediately had to like go back, like close the portal, eliminate this monster, and then like shut down the entire base and basically like mothball the entire project. But the problem with the Montauk thing is that there's no, like, I couldn't find anything that would confirm like anything beyond like those stories, right? Then like it's like hearsay. And so without any other evidence, I don't know how real that is. It might be just old wives' tale. It might have happened. I mean, from what we've learned from, Stargate, that should already blow your mind, right? That you're able to, that consciousness is not a locally occurring phenomenon. It's non-local. They literally had Stargate psychics go into the Oval Office and tell them what was the president was reading that day on his desk. So, and what was so interesting about Stargate is not only did they try to do all this work, obviously to spy, they also tried to create defense mechanisms. So if you think about it, they realized that, and the reason why they were interested in psychic abilities is because the Soviets were already there. The Soviets in the early 70s had a woman who could stop a frog's heart with just her mind. And there's a video that circulated the Pentagon about this. The Pentagon got freaked out. Again, they weren't sure how real this was. They thought maybe it's a fake, but they're like, we might as well throw money into trying how to figure out how to do this if it's real, because if the Soviets are doing it, we need to do it. And, so one of the things they were worried about is like they knew that the Soviets also had their own version of the Stargate project and had been running longer and, to probably better success than their project. And so they were trying to figure out ways to defend themselves. So they tried lead shielding. They're like, okay, what if we put an object behind lead? They tried, tungsten, titanium, Faraday cage, radio signal interference, like everything you could think of, known to man. And basically they found that there's no defense against this, that this consciousness can project itself through any material, through any type of matter, and can move through, like we said, space, like it's as if space doesn't exist, but it also can move through time. So they found that, you could go back and remote view historical events, and you could even go and remote view the future. So you could go and attempt to remote view the future. But what they found is that the issue with the future remote viewing is that there was usually a lot of interference, and that it was much more like you were viewing a possible future, not an actual future. And if you sent psychics to do remote viewing the future too often, they would get very, very fatigued, and their results would start to go way off. And obviously, the closer to the present day that you remote view into the future, they found more accuracy. So if you were like, let's remote view the Pentagon in 1 week from now, it was very accurate. If you said, let's remote view the Pentagon in 6 months from now, it was less accurate. And then 2 years from now, it was less and less accurate. It just like the quality of the details that the psychics could describe about the grounds or about the people there got lower and lower and lower and lower as you move further into the future. And so they found that it wasn't really, accurate for that. But they found that there's no defense against this. And they ran this program for 23 years. And basically they found all these ways to amplify their psychic power, to, basically train their psychics to become better at their own job. And, the Stanford Research Institute, which had kind of kickstarted this whole process, right? They had shuttered their doors. They lost their CIA funding in 1978. But what they had found, and this was in conjunction also with Robert Monroe, is that sound frequencies have a huge amount of impact on this. So when you play, right, like let's say you're sitting in a room, you listen to your headphones, and you're listening to music at 100 hertz, right? The human ear can only hear a certain range of frequencies. Once you go outside of that range of frequencies, like let's say extremely low, like 4 hertz, 10 hertz, 20 hertz, you cannot hear at all. It's like that kind of noise is, what's called it's almost like subliminal, right? Subaudible, I think it's called. And that subaudible noise, like other animals can hear it, right? Like if you have a dog whistle, you can whistle a dog whistle, you can blow a dog whistle, and the dog will come, but it won't hurt your ear because it literally is outside of your range of perception. It won't hurt your organs. And so your hearing organs, right? Your eardrums. And so what they found, which was so interesting, is that if you played 2 different frequencies in the ear, so if you played 432 in one ear and 428 in the other ear, your brain would pick up on not only on the frequencies in each ear, it would pick up on the difference between the 2 frequencies. So that was what was called the interference frequency, or the beat frequency. And so if you wanted to induce someone to be at 4 hertz brainwave, and a 4 hertz brainwave is that's like deep delta sleep. They're like 1 to 4 hertz is like deep sleep. If you wanted to help people sleep more, you would play these binaural beats. So you play 438 in one ear and 428 in the other, or 432 in one ear and 428 in the other ear, and it would come out to 4 hertz. And then they would be able to hear, like they're not physically hear, but their brain would hear that 4 hertz, and it would start to sync their own brain waves to that 4 hertz rhythm. And that would lull somebody into sleep. And so once they realized this, they're like, wow, well, we can get headphones on our psychics, and we can, we all already have determined what are the frequencies at which their brainwaves are moving when they're accessing higher states of consciousness, right? Like if it's 25 hertz, they're able to access, that's what their brainwaves at is when they're doing remote viewing. So they're like, well, why don't we just take that, that frequency and put it into these binaural beats, and then we can create this audio that will help train other psychics to get to that frequency easier. It's kind of like training wheels on a bike. It allows you to get there. And it's not to say you need this. Like you could get to the same level of concentration and frequency with just your own brain with enough practice. The problem is it just would take a long, long time. Like we're talking years to even get remotely good at it. And so these binaural beats, right, this auditory program helped to accelerate the process. And that was what the Monroe Institute specialized in. So that's another part of this puzzle, right? Which I'm not sure if you've dove down that rabbit hole, but all this, they worked with Bob Monroe for a lot of the Stargate project because Bob Monroe, he was a radio executive in the 1950s, and in the early to mid 50s, he was experimenting on ways to teach himself at night. Like he was sleeping and he wanted to learn while he slept. So he's like, why don't I play music in my headphones while I sleep and have a voice talk over it, teaching me something. Like I want to learn about history or politics. And he's like, it'd be great that I could go to bed and wake up in the morning with 8 hours of studying done without actually having to sit there and study.
Like the classic Matrix example of just downloading something without needing to like take time out of your day to focus on it. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and again, he was, we've known about binaural beats for a long time. So he was messing around with binaural beats. And he found his audio engineers kept tweaking, because he was a radio executive. He had all these audio engineers working for him. He kept tweaking things. And then one night he goes to bed, plays a new tape, and he wakes up and he realizes that he's floating above his bed. And he starts floating up higher and higher and higher until until he bumps the ceiling. And then he turns around and he freaks out because he sees below him, there's his wife in bed with another man. And so he shouts and he's like, what? And then he looks closer and he realizes that his wife is in bed with him. He's the other man. He's looking at himself. And he's like, what? And so he freaks out and he kind of swims through the air, gets back in his own body, wakes up in a cold sweat. His wife is like, what's going on? He's like, I just had this really weird dream that I was floating outside my body. So the next night he's like, that was weird, but maybe I'm going to try that tape again. He tries it again. It happens again. The exact same thing. Then he tries it again. For 9 nights in a row, he does the exact same thing. And after the 9th night, he's like, maybe this isn't a dream. Like, maybe this is actually happening. So he goes to all these psychiatrists. He gets checked out. Several different independent psychiatrists clear him for no schizophrenia, no paranoia, no delusions. They say, no, you're mentally healthy. If you're experiencing this, you need to actually look into it. And so he was the one who was pioneering all these auditory programs. And so what Stargate did essentially was take the SRI research into psychic ability.
That's the Stanford Research Institute.
The Stanford
right?
Research Institute, yeah. So they took like the basics of understanding of how this ability worked, right, and how to properly test it and actually screen for good psychics. Because that was the other thing, is that the Stanford Research Institute, they screened the general population, right, because they wanted to find out how many people actually have this ability, and they found only it was something like 6% of the population is proficient at it, like really good. And then 1% are like what you would call like, the elites, like the ones who can really do it. And it's not to say that anyone can't train themselves to be like, to learn a psychic gift, or like be able to sense things at a distance, or, tell the future or something like that. And again, it's not always 100%, but, it's not to say that everybody can or nobody can do this. Everyone can do it to a certain extent. It's just that your like ability cap is limited. So like some people, they'll be able to get to a point where, like, let's say they can do remote viewing, but they can't astral project, or they can't like accurately tell the future, or they can't, like use the energy healing to like heal themselves faster. They can't do those things. But then other people, it's like speed running it. Like they'll be able to smash through all these levels and then get to the highest level where they can like go into the past and go into the future and look at somebody and instantly tell them what they're thinking, like what Uri Geller thought, what he was able to do. So like there's like different abilities, and about 1% of the population is what you would call like extremely gifted, and about 6% is just like really, really good at it, like what you'd call like maybe naturally gifted. And that makes sense if you think about like sports, right? Like 1% of people are just god tier level basketball players, chess players, and then there's maybe like 5% that are like really still really good, but maybe not like NBA level, NFL level, and then there's basically the rest of us, which are not so great. And so they used Stargate subjects and they used the Gateway tapes, and they're called Gateway because that's what Robert Monroe and the Monroe Institute termed his program. They used the Gateway tapes to train and to increase the power of their psychics, because they found that when they used the tapes, it could help accelerate their learning curve, and help them get to these states of consciousness faster. But eventually, like all psychics, and even before the tapes, right, psychics were able to get to the state of consciousness even without it. It takes longer and more practice.
I want to take one quick tangent before we talk about your gateway story, which I think would be super interesting. One of the subjects I talk about all the time on here, and so many people are thinking about this, is just like these new alternative holistic ways to heal and create healing. You talked about healing a little bit in that conversation, and you mentioned how 4 hertz is the one that they use for sleeping, and I imagine there are other different frequencies which could have different effects on the human body, potentially healing effects that heal different things. And I want to say, I've been looking at so many movies recently, so many documentaries, I get them mixed up. I'm pretty sure the Primordial Code, I told you yesterday, I had this documentarian on my podcast, Marine Pools, who has this extremely interesting 2 documentaries out of a trilogy, third's coming up, about a lot of it is about frequencies and the power of sound to heal you, and just how all this science was brushed away. And that, did you hear about the bells, like all the bells that were destroyed because the vibration was healing? And the pharmaceutical companies can't have that. We need to push more pills. So all these frequency effects that really healed people. So have you looked into this at all? How like sound healing works and these different frequencies, how they can heal different problems people face?
Yeah, I mean, I have heard, and you know this, and I've even written about this, right? Like, I used to have insomnia, and I started using binaural beats. And the first day I used binaural beats, I walked into this like meditation room at my old fintech job, and I was like, again, I was exhausted. I just could not sleep. I put on the binaural beats. I laid down in the chair, and I fall asleep for like an hour and a half, and I wake up. And again, this is at a time when I'm sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night. I have to take pills to sleep. I cannot fall asleep, and this thing like knocks me out, and it just relaxes me, right, to a level that I haven't been relaxed at before. And I was like, what the hell? Like, what the fuck was that? And so that's when I started researching how frequencies work. And, there are, like in Gateway, so in the Gateway process doc, the analyst who's writing this, which is basically like he's like an army intelligence group commander. His name is, let me see, Wayne McDonald. That was his name. So Wayne McDonald, he describes like, several different things you can do with frequencies to change like your state, right? So like, for example, one of the things they say with Gateway is if you do the energy bar or energy bar tape, they teach you how to create this like energy bar and do a color breathing, and you intently focus on a specific color and try to meditate on getting your brain to basically sync to that, sync your brain waves to the same frequency of that color that would be on the electromagnetic spectrum. And it sounds like hocus pocus, like how can you get your brain to think of like intently focus on a color? But for some reason, people's brains like intuitively know that red is this specific frequency, and you can get there if you just focus on the color red. You don't have to focus. You don't even know what the frequency is. Your brain waves will start to zero in on that frequency. And so, or maybe like a derivative of that frequency. So if red is like 300 hertz, it would be like 1/100th. So it'd be like 3 hertz, but it would be like in scales of, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, it'll be the same. So it'll like, basically like a fractal level, like be a mirror image of that frequency. So because it's like a tenth of it, and then a tenth of it, it's factors of 10. So people are able, so if you use red, you're able to increase strength, increase power, increase energy. If you use green, you're able to clear out your lymphatic system and basically clear out viruses. Purple is healing. It's like there's several different ones. If I can even look like in this document, but there's like maybe like 6 or 7 different colors that they talk about, and those colors basically allow people to access different states of consciousness, which can change their own body. So if they want to heal faster, they want to clear out their body from infection, if they want to get more power with a workout, or just in general, they're able to focus on this energy frequency, and then they're able to like feel the effects of it, right? So like, for example, they talk about in some of the later Gateway docs about how they were able to use color, and this like intently focusing on color to accelerate healing. So they had experiments where they would burn like superficial burns on people, and then they would have them do like different meditations to try to heal it. And the people who did focus on like the color purple were able to heal at twice the rate of a normal person who was focusing on like a different color. So again, it's not like you focus on any color and it works. It's a specific frequency of color that will actually do the desired effect, and all the other frequencies will have no effect. Nothing happens. So yeah, they were able to do that. And like, that makes you think of everything different, right? So like the bell thing, I haven't dug into super deep, but like the bell, they destroyed all these bells post World War II and during World War II. And I think it was like 20,000 bells across Europe and North America were scrapped. And the reason given for this theoretically was they wanted to use the metal for bullets, right? They needed them for military purposes. But they've found like a lot of these pictures of, the bells basically being destroyed. Like literally they'll chip the bell, so they'll have an explosive and they'll blow up part of the bell, or they'll use like some hammer or something to break the bell. And then they would just bury them in mass in like these giant, basically like bell graveyards, and bury them with dirt. And so all those bells lost their ability to ring, and then people didn't hear bells ringing, and then I guess things change. And so I don't know how valid, I haven't dug deep into that conspiracy, so I don't know how valid that is. But I mean, after you learn about Gateway and you learn about how important frequencies are, it doesn't shock me that that these things could actually change, right? Your perception, your ability, your state, your mood, right? Like, I mean, they've even shown that there are frequencies of sound that can cause you to have anxiety. Like horrible anxiety. Like we're talking like you're going to die anxiety. There's a Y-Files episode. I don't think I've sent it to you yet, but where they were talking about, they called the CIA called it the Cuba effect. Basically they were having agents and diplomats in the U.S. Embassy in Cuba start to experience all these bad health effects. And they eventually realized that it was from a sound generator that was nearby, that was like aiming sound into the building, but it was sound that you can't hear, but it was a frequency that would cause the amygdala to activate, which is your fear center, and basically cause everyone there to feel like they're gonna, like something bad is gonna happen right now. So basically give everyone anxiety in the building. And so if they were able to do that, the 70s and 80s with a sound generator, like, yeah, I mean, is it impossible that the bells were keeping people spiritually awakened, and destroying them helped to just eliminate that? I don't think that's out of the question.
And this is the scary part about this stuff, is because it can be used for tremendous good and healing, or it can be used for evil. And another thing that comes to my mind that's just one of those just frequency, death weapons that can be made is, I can't remember, it might have been 2020 or some period when there was a lot of, civil unrest and people uprising in the streets. I remember seeing these videos in Australia. The police blockades set up these giant frequency pumper things on their trucks to just pump frequencies into this crowd of people. And everyone was like vomiting, getting super sick, lightheaded. People had to leave because they were showing all these signs of sickness from just these frequency pumpers, but you couldn't see or feel anything,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. Did you hear about that as well, or the similar things?
Yeah. So there's those are real. Like they have crowd control, basically like tanks that have these giant frequency generators that will tune to a certain frequency that cause physical sickness. They can even hurt people, like literally physically hurt them at a distance by vibrating vibrating the air at a certain frequency that starts to do damage to your cells. So it's almost like like radiation burn. But
I mean, even those scanners at the airport, like a lot of people don't know this. This is one of the things that every time I go to an airport, I try to post about this online to spread awareness on it. But those things that it's usually, I think it might just be in the US. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it's everywhere. But you
Mhm.
walk through that big scanner thing, it just scans around your whole body. And then you just walk through. A lot of people just do that without having a second thought, but that is literally cooking yourselves. You're microwaving yourself when you do that. And so a lot of people will find that they get sick when they're traveling or after
Mhm.
they fly, and they think it's because, some germs on a plane or something, when I believe it's because people are going through this little microwave thing a lot of the time. It could be a big part of it. I've completely stopped doing that. And you remember when on one of
Yeah,
our flights, you
yeah, that
saw
was
me
funny.
just going through this just shit mess of nonsense because the TSA guys are always just so bothered by you demanding the pat down, but they have to let you do a pat down instead. So it's you got to do these things sometimes, but it's scary how much is out there that can hurt people. But it's really optimistic that this can be used for really powerful good. But
Mhm.
this all kind of ties into this overarching theme that you and I and so many other people are really pushing right now: is how do we disarm these giant evil powers that have just too much infinite control over everything. It all
Mhm.
comes back to the money, like you like to talk about. Like you said in the beginning, you're usually like a finance writer. And
Mhm.
this all comes back to that. Like, why are all these evil entities so giant and powerful? It's because they control the money,
Mhm.
and they have control over these dark forces. When if we can take that power out of their hands, all of a sudden see a more decentralized world on a Bitcoin standard. People are in a world where they work together and care about each other and are incentivized to help others and not hurt them. Then we can see a huge resurgence in the healing power of these frequencies and technologies. I think it'd be really, really incredible. And that to me is the optimistic view. What do you think about the pessimistic versus optimistic future for this frequency power?
Yeah, well, I think again, I mean, it's hard because I haven't dove down into those rabbit holes. I don't know how much validity, and I don't want to talk on anything that I don't understand, right? And I still honestly have a like I would say like high school level, maybe like first year college understanding of gateway, because this is, once I started diving down this rabbit hole, like this goes into quantum physics, quantum entanglement, even the microtubules in your brain, right? Like this goes into literally the microstructures of the proteins in your brain and how they interact and resonate with each other, because you learn, very quickly that everything in our world vibrates, everything moves, everything has a frequency. So your clothing has a frequency, your car has a frequency, like literally everything. Your own body resonates at a natural frequency. And by the way, the earth has a frequency too. And so if the entire world has a frequency, then it also obviously makes sense that, you know, that can affect your brain, your habits, your beliefs, your own, your subconscious, and that can change what you believe and what you don't believe. And then that, like, understanding how those frequencies work can maybe used as a tool for control. And I think obviously having control of the money allows you to do that much easier, because you can just print money and spend it on these programs. Now, I don't know, and the problem is Stargate didn't go into enough detail to find out, because they were all figuring out how to increase psychic power, right? Like their goal was, how do we increase psychic power? How do we speed run this? How do we make it faster, easier, better? How do we find the gifted people? How do we, is there a gene, is there just a training program? And the gateway process is like the best training program that they were able to come up with, but there still isn't like a formal school apart from the Monroe Institute that teaches this stuff and that can train you. But nobody investigated, how do you reduce your power? How do you reduce your intuition? How do you reduce your spiritual ability? How do you reduce your vibration? So, as you can call it. And I think, it's not out of the realm of imagination that all this stuff with, the fake polyester clothes and the radio waves and just the constant bath of EMF radiation that you're in every single
Fluoride in
day.
the water, aluminum sprayed in the sky.
It's not like that shit. Again, it sounds crazy, but once you learn about gateway, you think like, man, if they found all these ways to increase psychic power, you don't think they could do the opposite? You don't think that there's ways to decrease it and to, make people more sheep like, right? Because what you learn about with Gateway and Stargate is that, and this is the amazing part, is that basically you are like an individual packet of concentrated consciousness. So consciousness exists through the entire world, through the entire universe at every level. So we're talking everything from rocks and trees to water to, you know, your food, to your animals, to your pets. And the more complex the organism, the more concentrated the consciousness. It's like a dog has more consciousness than a rock, obviously. But even water, and I showed you this the other day, and you can look this up too. There's a Japanese scientist who's experimented with water where he tells the water, he gets two petri dishes, one where he whispers positive things to it, and another he whispers negative things to it, freezes the water, and the water he whispers negative things to, it all breaks up, like all the crystals are misshapen, not symmetrical, like disgusting, gross looking, and the one he whispered positive things to, beautiful, symmetrical crystals in different that look like different patterns, right? And that's crazy, right? Like, how would water be able to, you know, why, if we live in a materialist scientist worldview, right? Which this is the world that Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye try to convince you exists, right? There is no spiritualism. There is no God. There is no, you know, heaven or hell. All that is mumbo jumbo human stuff. We're just evolved apes. We're just smart monkeys. That's all we are. Bugs on a rock in a void, as Vonnegut said. And if we're just bugs on a rock in a void, you shouldn't be able to affect, like, words should not be able to affect an inanimate object, right? Because again, they've done this experiment also with plants. So they have plants sitting in I remember seeing this in biology in class where they had like
Mythbusters did it. Did you,
yeah,
like they literally did
yeah.
this in that show. I remember seeing
and
that.
they whispered positive things to one plant and negative things to the other plant, and the one they whispered negative things to, the plant dies, and the one they whispered positive things to, the plant thrives. Oh, and by the way, here's another maybe interesting tidbit on the frequency thing. They've done similar experiments with microwave water versus boiled water. When you microwave water and feed it to a plant, the plant starts to wilt. And when you boil the water, it's completely fine. So that's another thing. Like, if microwaves have no impact on this, then why is it hurting the plant? So that's another interesting, but that's, you know, kind of aside from the point. The point is, human beings were able to, in multiple experiments, in multiple different ways, whether it's water crystals, whether it's salt crystals, whether it's, you know, animals, you know, like they're able to change the state of these objects or low level intelligence animals like rats just with their thoughts. And obviously the more experienced of a meditator and the more you know, you could say like powerful their mind, or the more powerful the wavelength of their of their consciousness, the stronger of an effect it had. But they found this basically universally. Everyone could do this. Everyone could affect these things. And so once you realize that, you start thinking, how much of my future am I determining with my own thoughts and words? Like, when I say things negative about myself, am I like basically manifesting negative results for myself? If I'm giving into fear, if I'm giving into hate, if I'm giving into anger, if I'm giving into all these other things, am I manifesting a negative future for myself and I don't even know it? Like, I'm creating, you know, I'm basically pulling the universe to give me bad experiences because I'm a bad person. And it kind of makes sense, because once you realize, like a lot of people are successful, right? It's like a snowball effect. You start becoming successful, and then all these people start to join you, and then other people start to want to do business with you, and then all these opportunities open up. And, you know, that could just be a network effect, but it also, I think, in a lot of ways, it's almost like a quantum effect. Like, you're starting to create ripples in the universe, and all these other people that normally would have never heard of you start reaching out to you, start finding you, start looking for you, and start wanting to work with you or make a partnership with you or talk to you or just do something with you. And so, yeah, I think this whole thing has made me rethink, like, how do I talk about myself? How do I think about others? How do I improve the world around me, right, with my own mind? Like, how can I change my mind to help the world? Yeah.
All right, man. I think it's time to go into the gateway. I want to hear about your experience, bro. Walk me through, like, when did you start doing this? And maybe give us a preview, because I mean, this is on, anyone can get this online, right? I can just throw a link to this and show it if anyone wants to. But I'm super intrigued by it after hearing your stories you were telling me yesterday. So could you walk us through like what the gateway tapes are like, and how you went through this process and what you experienced from it?
Yeah. So, okay. Again, like, and all this stuff sounds mumbo jumbo, sounds crazy until you actually start trying it, right? It's almost like carnivore. It's like carnivore sounds insane. No one wants to try it, but then it's like, all right, dude, if you don't believe me, try it for 30 days. And then you try it and you're like, wow, like I actually had a bunch of health benefits. My pain went away. My arthritis went away. Have more energy. Like that's crazy. And so it's the same thing with Gateway, where you can knock it all you want, but I dare you to try it for 3 months and see what happens, and like actually try it, like meditate. So yeah, so I told you about, okay, so I get on the plane, I read the whole Gateway document all the way through, all like 30 pages, which by the way, one of the pages is missing. The CIA says that they lost it. They lost it when they were scanning it, and that the file doesn't exist anymore. And they only had one copy of it. Okay, sure. All right, bro. You lost page 25. All right, sure. But anyways, so I read the whole Gateway doc, and I land back in Seattle in July 2nd. And basically, like within a couple of days, I'm like instantly like, I need to find this. And so I have a friend. We talked about Dan. He sends me all the Gateway tapes. They're also on the Internet Archive. So if you just search online, Gateway Process Internet Archive, it'll come across a link from 1996, and you'll be able to view and listen to all the Gateway tapes from 1996. They also release CDs. You can even buy, if you want. The Monroe Institute was cleared to sell all this stuff to the public. So you can go and buy the tapes like from the Monroe Institute. It's just the problem is it's like hundreds of dollars for each tape. So it's a lot of money. It'd be like $500 to buy the whole set of six waves of tapes. But anyway, so I started, and each group of activities is called a wave. So there's 6 waves, and I started the first one. The very first one is just like an intro one. You learn about binaural beats. You just focus on your breathing, focus on meditation, calming your mind, to kind of clear your mind of all your thoughts. The next one, you start getting into, you start trying to get to focus 10. And to get to focus 10, you're essentially
what are the focus levels? Could you give us a quick summary of what that is?
Sure. So, okay. So what they found with Stargate, right, is that there's like a natural progression of consciousness when you're elevating your consciousness. So there's like they call them focus levels, and the focus levels aren't necessarily like linear in the same way that you think. Like the difference between focus level 0 and focus level 10 is not the same difference as between 10 and 20. It's not like that. It just is like a demarcation line to show like, okay, this is like another stage you got to that's harder to get to, and they do get progressively harder. So to get to 10 is already very hard, and then get to 12 is harder, and then get to 15 is harder. But there's about I don't know. There's quite a few focus levels. So the first focus is focus level 1. Focus level 1 is where all of us are at all the time. Like this is idling. This is your brain walking around in the mall, hanging out with your girlfriend, hanging out with your wife, talking to your grandma, like just living life. You're focus level 1. When you lay down on a couch and start meditating and just like focusing on your breath and calming your mind, you get to focus level 3. So you're like a slightly more calm, relaxed, but intense version of consciousness, right? Focus level 10 is the first major focus level. And focus level 10 it's not easy to get to. So it's like, it takes, I mean, I would even say like, it's one of the like probably the hardest ones to get to, because you're trying to adapt your body to do something that's not normal to do. But you can think of focus 10 as that sensation of when you're laying on a couch, it's a lazy Sunday afternoon, and you're like dozing off, but you're not tired enough to fully fall asleep. And so you're like half asleep and half awake.
In that limbo zone.
In that limbo zone.
Yeah.
And so in that limbo zone, if you've daydreamed where you just like get caught in your thoughts, but you're also very relaxed. So you're like almost asleep, but you're having like a, Like you almost you can control it. You can have a dream. You can have an imaginary like event take place. You can think about life, what life was like when you were 7, like some random thing, right? Like something completely doesn't have to be serious. But the point with focus level 10 is you basically lose awareness of your body and your breathing and your heart. Because if you lay down on a bed, your body, if you can hear and be aware of your body and your breathing and your heart, and you're usually like too focused on that to actually focus on what you're thinking about. You're focused on the noise outside, the sensation, the coolness of the pillow on your head, your hand, your like maybe the whooshing of blood in your ears, and et cetera, et cetera. Like you're just too distracted. And once you finally start to like daydream, basically, you start to lose you basically zone out all that stuff and you're just focused on your daydream. So that's what focus level 10 is like. And it's actually more difficult to get to than you think, because again, imagine doing this unnatural, like you're able to do this once every blue moon, just if you're tired enough and if it's a comfortable enough afternoon and you're in the right mental frame. But like try to do this, like, okay, just sit down, instantly get to focus 10. Let's see you do it. It's like very hard. Can't do it. So that's the first one to get to. And I was practicing focus level 10 for about a month, and progressively I started to get more and more so the first thing I noticed is all my desires to like distract myself started to fall away. So within like 3 days, I used to spend time scrolling Twitter, scrolling Instagram, and the temptation for that just started to fall away. And I started to be able to concentrate for longer periods of time. And then very quickly after that, I started to get very vivid dreams. So I would do the exercise at night, like I do a gateway experience. I would calm my brain, calm my mind, focus on my breathing. And I started to, like nothing would happen. You just kind of sit there and just like, they have you do these exercises, right? They have you, they have you think of what's called an energy conversion box, where you mentally visualize a box, you put your energies, your negative energy, worries and concerns in it, you close the box, you basically put it away, say don't think about that, and then you just try to focus on your breathing or focus on a thought or something, and not like actually your worries and concerns and all the things you need to do the next day. So I did that. And again, you kind of, it's very slow. So you don't really feel like a massive impact the first day after you do it. But I noticed after about a week of doing that, I started to get very, very vivid dreams, like very vivid. Like it's almost as if, and like I said, the vividness also increased. So like by week 3 or 4, it was getting to the point where it's almost as if I'm like tripping. Like it's as if someone had given me like a psychedelic when I went to bed, because the entire night I'm dreaming. And the dreams,
lucid at all, or only vivid?
Some of them were lucid.
Okay.
Yeah. So some of them were like, dreams where random stuff would happen. Just, I'm just sitting with my friends. It's like 2008. I'm a kid, and we're like playing playing video games or something. It's something basic. But as I progressed, like the dreams started to get more and more strange, more and more weird, right? I had dreams about pyramids in the jungle of, Brazil, and that they were able to basically act as power stations. I had dreams about, I had dark dreams that were like demonic, where scary things happened. I had dreams where I was running through the woods, and I had an ability of like a telekinetic ability. I could move I'm running, and I can move the branches and trees like in front of me. And so I can like create a path through the brush as I'm running. And those kinds of dreams got, weirder and weirder. And then one night I remember I go on this brother's retreat with I have 3 other brothers. And we go on this retreat, and we're in the shadows of Mount Rainier, right? It's a summer evening. This is mid-July of this year. And my next oldest brother, Stein, is there's one bed that 2 people have to share, and so I lay down, and by the way, he's, like I said, he's going through his own kind of awakening, because he has this house that's been haunted. He doesn't know what's going on. He started having weird dreams too, this like spiritual awakening. I think we're connected because we're related, which, by the way, also gateway, really quick side note, Gateway found very strong relations, like strong connections between people who are related, especially like very close. So mother and daughter, or mother and son, very strong connections. If like they found, there was one they did, and this wasn't Stargate, but this was a side project of Stargate, where this was in the 70s in the Colorado mountains. They had a secret facility where they were testing twins. So there was one where they got two, what they called the Swedish twins. There's two blonde girls, blue eyes, and they're like 7 or 8 years old, and they could put them in different rooms, and they would write down something in front of one of them. And again, these are soundproof rooms that are like 40 feet away from each other, and the other one would draw exactly what the first one saw. And so it was like, and they repeated this hundreds of times. They were like able to prove definitively that this ability was real.
And
so,
in the telepathy tapes too, I feel like it's more common that the mom has that connection with the offspring more so than the dad. I'm not sure if that's like what the data is on that, but it tends to be very common that the mother is like the most connected with the kids.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so, and I've seen that in my own life, right? Like my mom has had these kind of intuitions too. Like she, in 2010, when my brother was in Chile, there was an earthquake in September of 2010, and he had been down there for his birthday, and she woke me up in the middle of the night and told me like, hey, something horrible happened to your brother. And I was like, what? I was like, did you see the news? Did he text you? No, I don't. She didn't have a phone at the time. Like, no, I don't even like, I just sense it. She's like, something bad happened. He's scared. He's in danger, And I'm like, maybe it was just a bad dream. And I told her to go to bed. Cause again, at the time I'm like, science, physics, there's no way scientifically she would actually, like, this is just a random occurrence. Right. And then the next morning he calls us, hey mom, hey dad, hey brother, like there's a 7.8 magnitude earthquake in Santiago. I was in a club. I was okay. I got out. The building didn't collapse. Other buildings collapsed, but I got to a friend's apartment. I'm safe. I can't get out of the country. The airports are closed, but I'm okay. And so she sensed that before he called us, right? Which is insane. Insane.
And you just had one with her recently too. I don't know if you want to share that one or not, but I mean, so many examples.
Yeah, no, I did have one with her recently where she knew exactly what I was going through, even though I had not told her what I was doing. And I came back and she told me exactly what had been happening. And that was kind of crazy because it's like when you see that happen in real life, it takes all this esoteric knowledge and puts it into like an actual framework where you're like, holy shit, like how is it that my mom can do this? This is insane. Okay. So anyways, again, I'll go back to the Gateway tapes, right? So I'm starting on like tape 2 of wave 1. And it's the focus 10, and my dreams start getting more and more vivid. And then one night I have a dream where my brother and I, and so the brothers retreat, we're in the shadows of Mount Rainier, like we're about to go spend like a weekend, like all hanging out, like hiking around the mountain, just, spending time, the 4 of us. And I have to sleep next to my brother because we have to share a bed. And then there's, my other 2 brothers have their own place to sleep. And we sleep next to each other, and both of us have the exact same dream that night. The exact same dream. And the dream is we break into a museum, we steal this Ankh, which is this Egyptian, it looks like a cross with like a circle on the top. It's like an Egyptian like artifact that symbolized light and like knowledge and intelligence back in the ancient Egyptian days, right? The times of the pharaohs, like 3000 BC. And we steal this Ankh and then we use it to time travel. And we're time traveling through different periods like the 1980s, the 1950s, and we're trying to do something with it, right? And what's so weird is, again, I wake up and I say, hey, like, bro, like I had this weird dream where this happened. And he was like, I had that same dream. And his dream was, it filled in different parts that I didn't have, and my dream filled in different parts that his didn't have, but it was like the same storyline. Like us getting together, breaking into museums, stealing this Ankh, traveling through time. And again, I don't think that the dream is actually meaning that like this is actually going to happen or that it has happened. I just think it's showing like the connection between our consciousnesses. Like,
yeah, your frequencies were together,
We're in proximity. Yeah. And so that was really weird. And so, and what's so strange is
That's
that,
just crazy detailed though. Like you would think that like a shared frequency, maybe you would think of like the same color or something like you were talking earlier.
yeah.
But this is like a whole complex storyline, which is wild.
Yeah, and what was so weird is that I remembered the break into the museum part and like how we snuck past these guards and like had to steal this ankh off the wall and then go into a like you know an altar and like use this specific ceremony, and then we all got, me, him, and one other person got transported back in time. And then but he remembers like the time jump stuff, and like I remember bits and pieces of like being in the 1983 and the 1953, but he remembers like specifically exactly like he's like, oh yeah, we were in Germany. And I was like, oh, you're right, that was German on the street sign. And he's like, yeah. And he was like, we were in Munich. And I was like, what? Like it just started all clicking for me. But anyway, so I see this weird Ankh symbol right in this dream. And it's a very, very vivid dream. Again, it's almost one of those where you think you're actually living it, and then you wake up and you're like, oh, that was just a dream. A week later, after the Bitcoin conference, I speak at the conference. I'm planning to do this documentary, actually one that we just released with Julian and Ian Carroll and Isabella. And Isabella is another Bitcoin content creator. And we show up, we go to the beach to start filming, and Isabella takes off her jacket and she's wearing, guess what? An ankh around her neck, the Egyptian symbol. And I just was like, what the fuck? You know, I could not. And I just,
And you didn't tell her about the whole
No.
story. I'm assuming it was like,
no, not in the moment. No. And I was like, because it sounds insane, right?
Mhm.
Like how,
yeah.
who would ever believe this? Like, oh, I've been dreaming. Like I have dreams of the future. And
And this is not like a common symbol. Like it's a
no,
really bizarre, like old thing, right?
this is an ancient Hermetic symbol. It's not like a cross, right? Like I have a cross around my neck. It's not a cross or Star of David or like a an Islamic symbol. This is something that relates to ancient Egyptian mysticism. It's not like nobody has this thing, but it's just a really weird coincidence, right? Really weird coincidence. And so yeah, and I talked to Ian about this, and I was like, dude, you need to read about this gateway process, because like the shit is starting to get crazy, bro.
Has he looked into it as well?
I gave him the full CIA, all the printed CIA docs. He still, when I talked to him back in November in person, he still hadn't like actually started prep training. So he hasn't, which to be fair, it is a commitment. Like you want to do this, you have to be like, okay, 30, 40 minutes each day. You should start reading books about it. You should start researching it. Like you can't just, this isn't something that you just, waltz into, do it for 2 days, and then you're an expert at it. Like this is something that takes work and time. But what started happening is I started noticing, like, as I continued with this, that I started to get more and more like weird, intuitions and weird coincidences. So, and I told you this, like, I'm thinking about texting Marty Bent. Marty Bent hasn't gotten back to me in 2 or 3 months. We're talking about making more documentaries next year. I pull up my phone. I'm open Signal. I look and I see his conversation and I say, man, literally in my head, I'm like, I really wish Marty would text me. Like, it's been a while. I don't know what I should do. Boom. 2 seconds later, I see a text say, hey, Bull, like, we need a sync to talk about this. And I was like, whoa. It is weird little things like that.
We need to hear his side of the story here. What was he feeling in that moment? I wonder if he felt something to do this.
You never know, man. You never know.
That's crazy.
You never know. And what was so weird about it is, again, all this stuff sounds fantastical, right? It sounds insane. But the thing that helped to ground me is that my brother was literally going through the same thing. So my brother, he was doing, he wasn't doing Gateway, but he's doing other things to like learn about his abilities and try to like understand his own mind. And he started having something similar where he would think of a friend. Like one weekend, he just randomly started thinking of this friend that he hasn't talked to in 7 years, since like one of his college friends. And then literally the next Monday, that guy calls him out of the blue and says, hey man, it's been a long time. I'm back in Seattle. Let's catch up. Like weird stuff like that. So it's just,
and your brother wasn't even doing the gateway
No.
thing, as you were talking about yesterday. You don't have to do the gateway to unlock this stuff, because way back in the day, allegedly, like, people could just do this everywhere. you know, because people were just more awakened on a higher level of consciousness. But for modern people right now, this is kind of a nice tool because it uses these frequencies. When you put on the headphones, it plays these
Yeah.
different frequencies. It just kind of speeds things up for your brain getting back into that mode, right?
Yeah. And they also say, so another thing with interesting with Gateway, they say you have to use wired headphones or wired earbuds. You cannot use Bluetooth because there's something that happens with the Bluetooth that messes up your brain's ability to learn and understand it, or like actively engage with the
It's
Gateway.
fucking cooking your brain. That's what it's doing. It doesn't surprise me
Yeah.
at all. It's terrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will. You'll never catch me dead wearing those stupid ear pods, dude. They're
Yeah.
terrible.
The AirPods. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, those are bad. But yeah, so okay, so August keeps rolling, right? Like September keeps rolling, and I continue with this, and then unfortunately, I get an injury. So I basically I hurt my stomach. I go out with some friends, eat some bad food, and my stomach gets inflamed, and I get this thing called gastritis, which is basically like inflammation and pain in the stomach. And I decide, I'm like, you know what, I need, I've been doing the Gateway process slowly, and Stormy, who was kind of like my mentor for this, he's done Gateway all the way to astral projection. Like he's gotten to the point where you slip your soul or consciousness out of your body, and then you like float around, and you're like looking at the world, and you can see your own body laying down below you. Like it's crazy, right? And so he's done this, and he's a very smart, like private equity guy, like very, very intelligent, knowledgeable. And he's not someone who would lie about this. So I know he was telling the truth, but he tells me I need to go slow. He says, hey, Bull, don't go too hard. Like you need to do each wave in order slowly and master each tape before you go to the next one. So that means when you're trying to do wave 10, you need to you need to be completely certain that you've mastered wave 10 or tape focus 10, focus 10 wave 1, tape 2. You need to fully master that before you need to move to the next one. It's kind of like a progression ladder. So it's like martial arts. Like you're not going to be able to fight the dojo master, right? The black belt until you get through all the white and the blue and the green and the purple and the brown belts. And so he's like, you're still a white belt. You need to stay at this level, stay on wave 1. But the problem is I got this injury, right? And so my stomach's hurting. It's taking forever to heal. It's a bitch. Like I can no longer have dairy. Every time I have dairy, my stomach gets upset and I feel like throwing up. And so I'm like, you know what? Screw this. I want to skip ahead to wave 2 and do like tape 5 of wave 2, which is the color breathing, which is the healing, accelerated healing. So I started doing these tapes, and each tape basically is a different wavelength. Like you're tuning into a different frequency. And so this one sounds different than the other ones, obviously, and it's way more advanced. And I do a couple sessions where I'm trying to focus on healing my body. And one night when I'm doing the exercise, I start noticing that my entire, like all my nerves in my arms and legs start tingling. And it starts with my left leg, and it starts moving up my spine. And then it's like it's that same sensation of when your foot's asleep or your leg's asleep, like it feels like your nerve is like static. It's like vibrating almost, but it's that feeling through my entire body and all my nerves. And I was like, whoa, like this is weird. And then the next night I do it, and the same thing happens again, and the same thing happens again. And I'm doing, Gateway continuously. And then in November, it starts happening without me meditating. So I would start waking up, like starting like maybe November 8th or 9th, like soon after the election, I start waking up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. And it's always accompanied with extremely vivid dreams. But I have an extremely vivid dream, and I wake up and my entire body is buzzing as if someone is like lightly electrocuting me. And I'm sweating and I'm hot and I'm like full of energy. And then the next night, the same thing happens again. And the next night, the same thing happens again. And after this happens for several weeks, I'm just like, what is going on? Like, I don't know. Like, what am I doing? Is this healing my body? Is this hurting me? I mean, it's causing me to lose sleep again and get crappy quality sleep. So I'm like, I can't keep doing this. And so I start reaching out to, Stormy, Mudra, some other people, and they basically tell me, okay, you're going too fast. Your body's starting to get overloaded. And basically you're tapping into this energy level that you're not ready for. And so that's overloading you, and it's causing you to get too like, yeah, like you're getting over your skis, like you're overcharging your body, and so you need to stop. And so I stopped, and about after a week, those like nightly wake ups with very vivid dreams, some of them very dark, some of them light, but like it's as if you close your eyes and you're instantly in like a trip, like a psychedelic trip. Those finally stopped, and so I still get vivid dreams, but they're not as intense. And then thank God the awakenings and like the buzzing feeling has stopped. But at the time, I started talking to a psychic, and again, I thought the psychic is crazy. I thought going and chatting with a psychic is insane. Like, this gateway stuff, it's interesting, but like, can you really sense things? And I sit down, and she instantly is like, "So tell me what's wrong with your stomach." And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "You have something going on with it. Like, I can sense like there's some pain." She's like, "There's some dark energy I see. I sense around your stomach." And I was like, "What?" And then we start talking, and of course she starts revealing things about my life that nobody should know. Like, I don't tell her what I do. She tells me that many people have seen me. I ask her about my family. She tells me details about my family.
She told you Jamie is going to $1 million tomorrow.
Yes, she told me that as well. Yeah, so like she's able to do all this stuff. And by the way, she did the same thing for my brother, where she was able to read him completely from, like, he comes in and she tells him, "Here's what happened when you were a kid. Like, you had these, like, she's like, I sense that you had this traumatic experience." And then she also sensed that we have one brother who's schizophrenic, who's like, basically suffers from schizophrenia. She's like, she told us that before we even mentioned it to her. And again, these are things where it's like one or two, you could say, okay, maybe she is a guess. Maybe there's a little tick I have when I'm talking about my brother that shows some discomfort. But I'm like, the fact that she can get like 10 things right, like there's something there. There's something there. Yeah.
So did that like weave in and change the way that you were doing the gateway process, or did you at this point decide that you needed to put it on the shelf for the time being because of the sleep problems you're talking about?
Yeah. So she was able to help me, like, kind of like understand, how this ability works. And she already has like a very high natural ability, obviously. But she also encouraged me to slow down because I was going too fast. I was jumping ahead. And she did tell me also, like, my stomach would be healed by the end of the year, which it has been. The pain is mostly gone now. I'm basically almost back at 100%. So she's right about that. And so she was able to give me some practices, grounding exercises, that help to, like, recenter you and get you back, and, don't overload you. Because again, a lot of this has to do with like your mental state and your stress. The more stressed you are, the more anxious you are, the less you are able to tap into like your innate abilities and your intuition. Because your intuition comes from like a very deep place in your body. It's like in your gut. If you're in your head all the time, you're not able to think about this stuff. And so it honestly makes me think, like, is this constant overstressed, overstimulated world? I mean, it's like the perfect soup to stop people from developing these abilities. And I'm sure, I mean, the more I've learned about this stuff, and also, talked about it in certain groups, the more I've seen more and more people come forward with stories, right? People saying, my grandma was dying. I had a dream where I figured out the day she was going to die. Or, someone else told me that they started getting testicular pain, like really sharp. And then their dad got diagnosed with a tumor down there, like 3 days later. So they sensed it before it happened. Like, stuff that, again, on its face, it just seems like a bunch of weird coincidences. But once you start adding it together, it's just like enough coincidence to get to the point where it's like, there's clearly something happening. And so she basically confirmed all that. She said, "All this is real." She's like, spirits are real. Your consciousness is real. Whatever you want to call it, a soul, a spirit, a consciousness, it exists outside of time and space. And so that's why you're able to do remote viewing, because you can literally tap into this quantum field that does not exist on the normal dimension that we think of as time and space. That's constrained by our rules of our universe, and it's able to, like, basically like speed, pop out, speed over here, and then pop back in, and then see what's happening, and then pop back out, and then pop back to you and pop back in, and then tell you the information that you gleaned from that. So, that's incredible. And I think it's also comforting, right? Because it makes me think, wow, well, this means I'm definitely going to, even if I die, like my consciousness will live on, right? My parents, my friends, all of you guys, like, we're all going to see each other again someday. And I don't know how, I don't know what form, I don't know how much we'll remember, but we're all going to be there, right? So it's like even if bad things happen, I'll survive. And so like my consciousness will survive. Even my body is no longer here. So yeah, it's very comforting in a lot of ways. And for the time being, I've paused it, but I'm excited this next year to get back into it eventually.
I'm curious where that like soul moving on idea confidence came from, because I don't remember which part of the story really, like, have you met people that really dove deep enough to where they saw that happening, where our souls do just continue on after our meat bag on Earth is dead? Like, how does that? Where's your reasoning for behind that?
Okay, so here's the interesting part, right? We started talking about the focus levels. We didn't even talk about what the focus levels are, right? So should we get into that then, basically, and like discuss?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So there are maybe 8 different focus levels, right? The first one, like we said, is focus 1. So focus 1 is like basic awareness. Then there's focus level 3, which is like how do you call it? Like meditation. Focus 10 is deep relaxation. Basically, they call it mind awake, body asleep. So you're daydreaming essentially. And then there's focus level 12, and focus level 12 is where you start to access things like remote viewing. So in focus 12, you can remote view any place on Earth, like regardless of space. So you can move your consciousness to Alaska. You can go to Africa. You can go to Antarctica. You can go check things out. You can move through walls. If you get good enough, like you can actively see things that are at specific coordinates, right? And then once you get past focus 12, you get to focus 15, and focus 15 is travel into the past. So at this focus level, you can start messing around with actual like time space, where you can go into like historical events, and you can see, like, at least what they term as seeing, you can like basically like perceive what's happening there. So again, I told you, like, they had some of the Stargate subjects go back into the past, and they looked at like Mars 1 million BC. They looked at the JFK assassination. All those files are sealed also, which is unfortunate. They just mentioned like, oh yeah, we went and had psychics go to the JFK assassination and like replay the event from different angles and tell us everything they saw. But all those files are in this other file that's sealed and blocked and black marked and will never be released. So focus 15 is where you can start to go back in time. And I should also say, so focus 12 is remote viewing. Focus 12 is also where you learn things like color breathing. You learn things, which is accelerated healing. You learn things like the body map. You learn how to like understand and sense your own body. You start to, and especially at focus level 10, like you start to notice things more. Like you lay down and you can start to hear the blood rushing in your ears, or you can like feel, like you can sense your heartbeat and like feel the blood pulsing through your entire body. And so that focus 15 is where you get to the point where you can travel into the past. And then focus 18, it's you get to this point of like unconditional love and acceptance. At this point, it's like a higher level where you can just get better and better at things like patterning. So patterning is like, you can think of it as intensive manifestation. So you're like, you have an intention. So you're like, I want to get accepted to medical school, and you just intently focus on it. And essentially, if you focus on it long enough, it, like, at this level of consciousness, it happens faster. So there are reports of people, like there's one guy who said, I want to meet a ton of beautiful women. And what happened is he said the next month, like he did it for 1 month and nothing happens. And then the next month after that, everywhere he went, there were beautiful chicks. And it's like, and they all wanted to talk to him. And he just like could not believe it. He was like, what is going on? Like he goes to the store, there's a couple beautiful girls. They all say hi, wave at him, smile. Then he goes to like, you know, go to the bowling alley. There's like 2 single girls in the lane next to him, invite him to go bowling with them. And he's just like, what is going on? And then at the end of this month, he is riding a motorcycle. And this is again, another account of somebody on YouTube. He's riding his motorcycle. He like is going onto an off ramp, and he slips in the rain and falls and slides. And there's a girl like standing on the corner of the intersection, and he slides right up next to her. And she like looks at him. He's like, this gorgeous girl. She like runs over, helps him get up. They start talking. And essentially she's like, you know, he's like, look, you're so cute. I want to ask you on a date. And she says, yes. And like a month later, they're dating. And then like a year later, they're married and they start having kids. And he's like, couldn't believe it. He's like, I thought about finding love. And within a month, like, it's like the universe arranged itself to give me what I wanted. And another thing to notice about like the patterning is at the patterning, you can only do positive intentions. So, and it even relates to like your subconscious. So for example, let's say you want to pattern something like, I want to stop being sick. You can't do that, because what you're doing is you're using a double negative. You're saying, I want to stop, which is a negative, a negation of something that of being sick, which is another negative state of being. You cannot negate a negative state of being in this manner. What you have to do is you have to say, I want to be healthy. I want to be, successful. I want to be friendly. I want to be kind. You can't say, I want to stop being mean. I want to be kind. There's like these little things they figured out where when they tried, I want to stop being sick, it just doesn't work. And then they're like, what is going on? And there's something to do with your subconscious brain and how your subconscious brain understands the world around you, that if you use anything negative, it will not compute, and it'll start moving towards the negative. So that's why you need to focus on how you talk to yourself and how you think and how you meditate during these focus levels. So anyway, so focus 18 is like unconditional love. Like I said, you get into patterning, you get into manifestation, you get into the energy bar tool, which is like a stronger version of the color breathing. So like I said, the color breathing is where you lay down, you breathe in, you think of a color, then you breathe out and think of the color. And you're just like very focused on just the color. The energy bar tool is where you concentrate that color into an energy bar and you move it up and down your body. And then you put it exactly like mentally where you need the healing to be done. So if it's your shoulder, if it's your arm, and again, this leads to like accelerated healing. And then 21, you get to, on focus 21, you start to get to the point where you can start to essentially move throughout the universe, time and space dissipate even more. And you, at these stages, you start to at least, okay, again, I've never reached this stage, and I don't know anyone who's personally gotten to 21, because it's like, past 18 it gets very hard to get to. But when you get to 21, they start talking about like you can like fly through the universe, and then you start running into other beings like aliens. And so they describe like these psychics who do gateway, because they were, they're very talented, very strong psychics. They just were like, how far can we push this? Like, let's just keep going through these levels and concentrating harder and harder and harder and seeing how much we can, like, quote unquote, elevate our consciousness. And they get to 21 and they start seeing like, they start meeting aliens. They start having beings visit them in these like weird states of consciousness that try to tell them stuff. Some of the beings try to attack you and try to hurt you. Other ones are trying to help you. Other ones are neutral and you're sort of like, what are you doing here? Like, you're a human being. Like, you shouldn't be able to access this level of consciousness. Like, what are you doing? Get back down there. Like, get out of here. So
get off my lawn.
Yeah.
Get off my astral plane.
Yeah. And then, so once you get to focus 23, right? Focus 23 is basically where you get to where 23 and 24 is where you're at when you have a near-death experience. So focus 23 is like essentially very hard to reach unless you have a near-death experience. But everyone who had a near-death experience gets to focus 23, because essentially they're like on the doorstep of their soul completely leaving their body, and then they're able to get sucked back in. And another thing that's important to note is that a lot of these psychics, they had their abilities activated by a near-death experience. So like Joe McGonigal, the guy who was subject 001 in Stargate, he was an Army intelligence officer, served in Vietnam. He would sense things happening before they did. He was already kind of psychic. Like they'd be walking and he'd sense, like, he's like, guys, stop. Like, there's something wrong. He's like, there's a booby trap. And then everyone's like, what are you talking about? We're in an abandoned village. There's nothing here. And he's like, stop. And then they all squat down and look, and there's like a razor wire with like a grenade, attached to it. And then he's like, okay. So he like sensed it before it happened. He had a near-death experience, and he essentially was poisoned, died. The doctors resuscitated him, and then he died again. And then the doctors resuscitated him and give him an anti-poison medication, an antidote or whatever. And they finally revive him after like 7 hours of him coming in and out and in and out. And in his experience, he basically goes through, he like speed runs all the focus levels, almost dies, goes to this level that he calls the absolute, and that they term in the gateway process in Stargate, the absolute, which is the final level of consciousness, which everyone who's reached it, like even the psychics who did it manually, which took like years of practice every day, they say it's like a beautiful white sea of love and like acceptance, and like everyone you ever know or everyone who's died that is there. It's like heaven, basically. And it's like you feel this sense of love and peace, and everything makes sense. All the pain and all the things you went through on Earth, they all make sense. They're all trying to teach you things. It's like you instantly grasp religion and how it all works, but then you get sucked back to like here and now. And so that's what happened with Joe McGonigal, is he died, basically went to heaven, had this experience, this like spiritual experience, and God told him, it's not your time, you need to go back. And it's like, gave him the boot, kicked him down the stairs, and he falls all the way, like almost like being sucked through the universe, and then falls all the way back into his body. And what's so interesting about those near-death experience stories is that, again, like they're crazy, but they're also eerily consistent. It's like, if this was just a weird dream you have, or some people hypothesize, right, like, oh, you release all this DMT when you near die, and so that's what gives you this random experience. But if that was the case, then shouldn't everyone just have a different random experience, right?
You're talking about like the light at the end of the tunnel thing.
Yeah, like
that's the one that I hear is very consistent, which is crazy.
Yeah. So it's like, why, if you were dying and you had this DMT release, right? Because some of the people, like the psychedelic community, think when you die, you have a huge release of DMT, and that's why you have these like mystical experiences, or that's where the near-death people have all these weird experiences. So if that was the case, then you would just see random stuff. So like some people would see an alien, some people would see a spaceship, some people see weird mushrooms growing out of orange, like, cheddar cheese on someone's head. Like it'd be random, right? But instead, it's almost like universally the same thing of like being teleported to this higher dimension of love, and it's all white and there's no colors, and it's just beautiful, indescribable, and then like they get zooted back down because of course they didn't die. And Joe McGonigal and several other psychics in the Stargate program had near-death experiences, and when they had that near-death experience, it's almost as if that journey of their consciousness moving through all the focus levels and then moving back like created a rut. So now it was much easier for them to move up and down in their consciousness because they'd already like sped run all the levels, right? Because the ultimate level is like this place where you die, right? This heaven, they call it the absolute, the end of all the dimensions. And between that, there are dimensions. Again, the Stargate psychics say there are dimensions where there are aliens, there are dimensions where there are demons, there are dimensions where there are evil things. One of the Stargate psychics that was projecting and trying to get through these levels higher and higher, they got stuck in a dimension where they're running in a maze basically for eternity with a bunch of demons chasing them with like pitchforks, trying to kill them and torture them. And when they finally snapped him out of it, it was like, he'd only been meditating for 10 minutes, but he was like, he's like, what the fuck? He's like, that felt like 10 years of running. It was like the creepiest thing ever. And he's like, I never want to go back there. He's like, I never want to do that again. Like, so let's not do that. Let's not find out what's there, because that's just evil. And again, these are all, it's all stories. We don't have, the problem with this stuff is we don't have like a concrete evidence of, like, you can't take pictures when you're there. You can only just tell people what you saw. But if dozens of psychics are seeing the same thing and they're independently, like if a psychic in New York and a psychic in LA say the same thing and they've never talked to each other, how are they coordinating their stories, right? So it's, and why would they lie too? Like, they're an internal CIA analyst or subject. Like, if they lie and get caught, they're going to get fired. They're going to get like court-martialed. So it just makes sense to me that this is more real than not. Yeah. And so then past, like I said, there's focus 24 and 25, which is basically like the death area. And then beyond that is like basically like the levels of heaven. And so there's like, you know, you get to levels where you start to download information, like you're in heaven in this otherworldly dimension, and you download information and you're able to learn things that you would never know, like answers to the eternal questions. But even before that, what happens is as you are elevating your consciousness, you are tapping into this, what Jung calls the universal subconscious, right? So it's like, or the universal unconscious. It's like this knowledge and energy force that pervades the universe. And that force can like come and tell you answers to things when you need to hear them, right? It's like how these things direct themselves. For example, Tesla mentioned often that the dreams for the ideas for his inventions came for him in his sleep, in his dreams. So as he's sitting there dreaming, it's like someone was like, hey, like, you're smart enough. Here's a Tesla coil. You need to build this. Or here's a radio. Here's how it works. And then he would like wake up and be like, holy shit, that makes so much sense. So even he credited that he didn't come up with all of his own ideas. And there's a famous Indian physicist or mathematician, I forgot his name, but he solved one of the world's hardest math problems. And he said that basically an Indian god came to him in a dream and told him the answer. So one of the Indian like gods of knowledge or whatever came and said, you know, hey, Srinavan, here's the answers to the math question you're solving. And then he solves it, and everyone in the world is like, how the fuck did you do that? Right. And so I think, you just start to tap into this frequency of just knowledge and ability and power that most people don't have. And so, I mean, I've had some weird things where I've had, like I said, I've had dreams, I've had intuitions, I've had thoughts, and I just write them out and then I put them on Twitter and then they blow up. And it's like, I didn't even come up with it. It's just like, it's almost as if I'm laying in bed and it just comes to me. And so, yeah, it's crazy.
Super crazy, dude. Thanks for sharing all that, man. I know we just crossed over 8 p.m. Do you have to run, or could I throw a couple more at you?
You can throw a couple more at me, sure.
One of the big ones I've got is, I know that you have sort of a back and forth ping-ponging in your life where you just, how you view religion, basically, because you have been sort of on the less believing side, on a more believing side. And I feel like this, I sense in you, just talking to you yesterday, that these experiences, both that you had personally and that you've heard from other people, have changed the way that you view religion and Christianity and just the higher realm. So how would you say this has changed your views on that? I know it's a big question, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts off the cuff here. Yeah.
So what I realized with all this stuff, right, is that I think religion has been changed, especially a lot in the last 200 years, to hide this knowledge, right? Because again, if you think about it, like, if you're able to access these higher states of consciousness, right, you can communicate with loved ones, you can sense things happening, like a mother can sense things happening to their child across great distances. Like I said, I was in Canada. I was going through this really intense time at this retreat, and my mom could not sleep for 2 days because she knew I was like struggling. She knew I was going through it. And, you know, if you're able to increase that in the population, then you're able to increase the rate at which people awaken and realize, you know, this kind of sham world we're in, right? This world where the Fed prints your money and the big pharma poisons you and big ag feeds you shitty food, and everything is like conspiring to keep you almost like a slave, like imprisoned in this mental jail.
Fiat world.
Yeah. And the problem is religion has largely, like, especially Western Christianity, and I can only speak on like Western postmodern Christianity because that's what I've grown up with. I think it's lost all of its mystical qualities. So all this knowledge, all this, how do we increase our vibration? How do we increase our ability to meditate and ability to pray, for example? Like, for here's the simplest answer. The way you pray now, the way that the Christians pray now, is completely wrong. Completely wrong once you understand Gateway. Because they say, put your hands together. Dear God, thank you for this food. Rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub. Good night, right? That's their prayer. And they think that that works. It does not work, really, right? The way you pray is through meditation. You sit with your thoughts, you focus on your breath, you calm your mind, and you try to focus, right? That's the point of Gateway. Is what Gateway is saying is, like, your brain is like a lamp. It has a ton of energy, right? Literally a ton of energy, but it's shooting electric, these photons everywhere. It's shooting the energy everywhere. And we want to turn it into
chaotic.
a laser.
It's like diffused. Yeah.
It's diffused. And because of that, you never actually are able to accomplish anything. Not only obviously logically, like physically, but like mentally, you can't accomplish anything because you're not focusing that energy into like a laser beam. And the goal of Gateway is to focus your mind into a laser and make it into like basically like a pinpointer of like, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to get. And it shoots a bullet through the fabric of space-time, and pushes your vision of what you want into the world, right? And again, there's these conditions, like it has to be positive. Like if you want to bring in negative things, you're going to bring in negative forces into your life, and so you don't want to do that. So you have to do something positive. But like the way that they teach you to pray, the way that they teach you to eat, the way that they teach you to think in modern religion, it's like someone went through and stripped out all of the mysticism and all of the actual, like, you call this like science or even pseudoscience on the frequencies, and they just gave you like the bland, like boring, white picket fence version of how everything works. And it isn't true, right? Like, you go look at, okay, for example, so one of the things they have you do in Gateway, and this is really interesting, right? One of the things they have you do in Gateway is what I would call like, meditative humming. So you breathe in and breathe out through your mouth. And you try to match the frequency of your vocal cord to a sound you're hearing in your ear. Now, if you go listen to Gregorian chants from the 14 and 1500s, what were the monks doing? The monks would sit in a circle, they'd all breathe in, and then they go, oh, and then they'd sing a repetitive song, but they'd be humming at a certain frequency the entire time. These monasteries also had obviously centers for meditation. It was all about focusing your brain power and focusing your energy. They had obviously celibacy, like preserving your sexual power, that's another thing I didn't even mention, dude. Like, the Gateway meditations are much more powerful when you're celibate. Much more powerful. Like, literally, it's like taking your power level from like 10 to 20 just by being celibate, just by not doing any of that stuff.
And that really goes kind of into the nofap and the semen retention, because for guys especially, when you go a long time without, getting off, you can feel your energy levels are just raised. You have more oomph in your step. You have more motivation. And that's no secret. Like, that's real.
Yeah, you're right. And so, so anyway, so the ancient, like, when you think of Orthodox Christianity or, medieval Catholicism, the Gregorian chants, they would sit around and they'd hum. Why are they humming? Because they're humming to vibrate their vocal cords at a frequency, and the vibration of their vocal cords helps to activate their brain to also move, vibrate at that frequency because they're generating that sound wave within their body. So the point of the humming, of the chanting, was to get that frequency and increase their spiritual power. The same thing with meditation. The way that monks meditate and the way that monks pray is not the way that most people think. Again, it's not the Christian, white picket fence, nuclear family, sit around the table, rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub, thank you, Jesus. No, it's you sit in a room, you have a wooden floor, you have a cross in front of you, you have a couple candles, and all you do is you stare at the candlelight and you just focus. You clear your mind and you just focus on, like they'll have prayers where they just focus on love or gratitude or thankfulness for existing. And what they find, obviously, is these monks, after years of doing this, become extremely proficient at it, and they can start sensing things about people. And they all call this the voice of God, the Holy Spirit. They say, because I did all this work to meditate, I'm tapping into the Holy Spirit. So when I see somebody, I know what's wrong with them. I go up to them and I tell them, hey, brother, you have an issue with your liver. You're drinking too much. And then the brother, the guy says, the congregation, what are you talking about? And he says, I can sense it, brother. You need to stop drinking. They're able to do those things, just like what the psychic did with me. Your stomach is hurting. You're not telling anyone about it. You need to fix it. Same thing. So all this knowledge, right? The knowledge with how the bells work and all the monasteries, the knowledge of even the geometry, this is when you get into weird stuff where all the geometry on all the ancient church steeples was Fibonacci sequences. So, 3, 5, 8, 13, it just matched all the perfect numbers, and the golden ratio, which is the ratio between each Fibonacci number if you divide one by the one before it. So if you divide 13 by 8, you get the golden ratio, which is 1.61, out to infinity. And you get the same ratio if you go to, the next Fibonacci numbers, right? 21 divided by 13 or 34 divided by 21, it's the same ratio. And that golden ratio is seen everywhere in these ancient monasteries and ancient churches all throughout Europe and even Latin America and, the Middle East. And even Hinduism has similar things. If you look at Buddhist temples in India, you look at them in Bangladesh, the Southeast Asia, they all have the same mathematical properties. And so you go from, the monks in the monasteries, the Buddhist monks in the monasteries in, Tibet to the monks in the, Frankish, highlands to the Swiss Alps, they all essentially had the same way of living of extreme rusticism, extreme asceticism. They're focused on learning and understanding how the world works, how to tap into the Holy Spirit, how you pray and how you chant and how you channel this force and basically increase your spiritual gift. And that is really that's truly what you could call a shaman or a priest or a pastor should be about. They should be about accessing this kind of power because it's very powerful. Again, you can go and talk to people. You can tell what's wrong with them. You get intuitions just randomly. And the more and more you do it, the more rapidly and the more accurately they come. And so, modern religion, dude, it's stripped all of that from it. They don't teach you to hum. They don't teach you to do Gregorian chants. They don't teach you about the gongs. You go look at Tibetan monastery, they have gongs everywhere. And the gongs are specifically made. And they have to be made by a Tibetan monk. And they're made in a special way with a special types of bronze. And when you bang them, they vibrate at a special frequency. And you do, when you learn about Zen meditation in Japan, they have sound bowls. And so they'll get a bowl and they have a little rod and they spin it around and it makes a sound. And all the monks sit there and meditate listening to that sound. So all this stuff is still, again, people still know it exists, but it's not it's not well known. It's all this is hidden, So
yeah, it's the OG Gateway tapes. They have all these just ancient practices that really brought people up to a much higher consciousness, and we've seen the fiatization affect even religions at this point. And I have to wonder if is this realization as people learn about this, is this going to start sort of an arms race between the religions to climb this ladder of this true method of reaching higher consciousness? And what are people going to find out when they do that? Are they going to have, experiences that challenge their religious beliefs, or is it going to enforce it even more? Who knows? I think that's super interesting to think about. But I mean, what we can know for sure is that there is definitely a mass awakening going on, religious or not. And I, I guess this is a good, actually, final question for you to kind of wrap this up here is, how do you think that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people are learning about this crazy, like, mind stuff that sounds crazy. The telepathy tapes, the gateway tapes. This stuff is all coming out because the internet is distributing it faster than ever. I think we're going to see a resurgence in knowledge around this topic. How do you think that this new knowledge will intertwine with the broader awakening going on worldwide right now?
I think more and more people will start to do gateway, right? I think more and more people start to do things to elevate their consciousness and to start to reject the modernity that has poisoned us, right? Like spiritually. Because again, one of the things you learn about really quickly in gateway is giving into any of your physical desires, your carnal need, like the things that are base, right? Viewing pornography, like doing drugs, alcohol, all of that lowers your vibration. And I even experimented with this, right? Like, again, I told you I did NoFap and then I went off NoFap and I tried meditating, and the meditations, like the effect of the tingling sensation stopped for like 4 or 5 days. And then it came back. It's like my body was like, no, you just messed up. You don't get to get here. And I was like, oh crap. Or I go drink and the next day I meditate, doesn't work. And I'm like, damn, this is insane. So you start to realize very quickly, like, how sensitive your body actually is to this stuff. And I think the more like this gateway stuff, there's a couple guys on Twitter. Vicky Verna is one of them. The Concerned Citizens and others posted about it a little bit. There's a couple other people. There's one bot called biofeedback something, but he talks about gateway stuff, and those accounts have been blowing up, getting tens of thousands of followers, millions of views of tweets. That guy Vicky Verna did a tweet on the gateway process. He's like, here's the secret CIA document that it explains how you can move beyond space and time, and that tweet got 1 million views and like 10,000 likes. And he had the link. He had the whole thread of like the gateway process, what it is, and like a link about it. There's the Y-Files episodes about it, which have been really good on the gateway process. There's another guy called Area 52 on YouTube. If you look up Area 52, he has a documentary, and that documentary has like, I think 100,000 views. And it's a 3-part documentary where he not only starts trying the gateway tapes, he actually flies to the Monroe Institute in Virginia and does their 7-day intensive, like program where they put you in a padded room basically and like have sound and, all the technology that they have and the newest auditory tapes, and they play it for you and they have you concentrate and try to elevate your consciousness. And he describes his experience, and he's able to sense things that other people were thinking. Like one guy was thinking about it was like, I think it was the Denver, is it the Nuggets, the NBA team? I don't remember. I don't really follow.
Yeah,
but it's
Denver
like
Nuggets.
The Denver Nuggets, and this guy is like, he has a bet in the game and he's thinking about it constantly. And then after the thing, he's like, guys, I couldn't stop thinking about this bracket. He's like, it looks like a basketball bracket. And then there's one guy that was doing the program with him. He's like, dude, I had money on the game. I couldn't stop thinking about the game my entire experience. And then he's like, what? Like, just weird little coincidences. But anyway, so content like that is blowing up. And that's finally causing people to wake up and realize, like, there's a battle going on right now for your soul, right? This is not only a physical battle. This is a spiritual battle. And whether you believe in religion or not, at least when I can talk about the gateway stuff is real. We're more than just, like what Robert Monroe says in the very first phrase, you are more than just physical matter. You're on the verge of discovering who and what you truly are. And so I think people are waking up that, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and you need to fight back and understand what's happening to you spiritually, because, your soul is at stake. So it's important.
Amazing stuff, man. Really appreciate you coming on to share all this, dude. I know this is definitely a different type of content for both of us, and I just think that we're at that phase. Like you said, we're in a battle for our souls right now. You know, from every level, we just see so many things coming after us with negative inputs, and we need to learn how to rise above that and fight back and win this battle. And I think that the more information we can put out there right now using this social media and podcasting and Substack and Twitter, all these different things we have, Noster, is super important. So really appreciate you joining me today, man. It was great to see you yesterday. Glad we could do this follow-up as well. And looking forward to continue following along your journey, dude. Let me know if you get back into it, because I want to hear how things go. And I definitely want to do it myself at some point. I haven't really planned it out because, like you said, I want to really pick a good time where I can really focus in and be relaxed on it. So looking forward to it, man.
It is
Interesting
exciting.
times ahead.
Yes. And like I said, this is a journey. So if you decide to start this journey, that's fine. You need to know what you're doing. You need to do some research, read some books, and be prepared to start to experience things that you think are like fantastical, and it makes normal life start to have it's like everything has a different glow. You know, we live in this world that is we can actually change, right? And our consciousness, our mind, what we think matters. And so you become much more careful with everything. So I hope you do it. I hope you have a good experience. I think you will. Almost universally, everyone does. But it is a process, and it'll take time. It'll take months of practice, but you'll have some incredible results, I'm sure.
Amazing. Where can people go follow you, sir, and dig into more of your work? Which isn't all about this stuff, I should say.
It's not at all about this stuff. And again, like I said, so if you want to find people who really post about this stuff, I don't really post about it on Twitter. Obviously, I know that maybe there's a portion of your audience that's going to look at me and think I'm insane, think that I have a screw loose, and that's fine. You can think whatever you want. I just challenge you to start doing the gateway tapes and to see it for yourself, like see what happens. But there's a couple people on Twitter. So there's, like I said, there's Vicky Verna. That just sounds like I can look him up right now. Vicky Verna, Vicky, and then space Verma, Vicky Verma.
And I'll put these all in the show notes for people. I'll just make a list.
There's also Biofeedback, and Biofeedback is another account that does 369, Biofeedback 369. He talks about ancient occult knowledge, mysticism, right? Like Gateway, Stargate, that kind of stuff. All the spicy stuff. And then, like I said, on YouTube, there's a couple different creators who've done stuff. There's the Area 52 guys. There's Why Files. And then there's also a really good podcast, but it's very long and very complex, from Space Age Maximalist on Twitter. If you look up Space Age Maximalist, his podcast with Stormy, they're 9 hours or 8 hours total, but it goes very deep into the science and physics of how this works.
Amazing. This is a great timing to finish it, dude, because I am about to finish my my cup of Shilajit water. I'm detoxing from all that negative energy all around us so I can open up my third eye. And, dude, it's been a pleasure, man. Really glad we could do this. We'll be in touch, bro. Looking forward to number 3 already. See you later, man.
Me too. See ya.